My name is Russell Guinan. I'm the Chief Principal Deputy Fiscal Analyst with the Fiscal Analysis Division of the Legislative Counsel Bureau, for the record. And since we don't have a chair and a vice chair, and we will use Ms. Rosenthal as the previous vice chair, as the acting chair. But with this, then I'd like to bring the meeting of the Economic Forum's June 9th, 2022 meeting into session. And with that, the first item on the agenda is the roll call. And so as staff to the Economic Forum, I will be trying to help administer the meeting, and once a chair is elected, then be working with the chair virtually to work through the agenda items today. So under the first agenda item, roll call, as I call your name, then you can say here, and so I'll also say in advance that when we're actually taking action and all that, it's best if you stay muted and then unmute yourself to respond. And we will be doing everything sort of through roll call versus a show of hands, so we can make sure the members of the public that are attending can have all this go into the public record. And so with the two new members, I just wanted to help that as some guidance. So with that, Michael Chrome.
Unmuting here.
Thank you. Marvin Levitt.
Here.
Thank you. Jennifer Lewis.
Here.
Thank you. Linda Rosenthal.
Here.
Thank you. Vincent Zahn.
Here.
Thank you. Let the record show that all members that have been appointed to the Economic Forum are present. And with that, then we can move on to the next agenda item, which is opening remarks. And so I think I will turn this then over to Member Rosenthal to begin with.
Good morning. Yep. Good morning. For the record, my name is Linda Rosenthal. As a returning member and the previous vice chair, staff has requested me to be the acting chair until a chair is elected during this meeting. Therefore, I would like to make a few opening remarks regarding today's meeting of the Economic Forum. First, I would like to welcome back Ms. Lewis and Mr. Levitt as returning members who were reappointed by Governor Sisolak, with Ms. Lewis nominated by Senate Majority Leader Nicole Cannizzaro and Mr. Levitt nominated by Speaker of the Assembly Jason Frierson. I would also like to welcome Mr. Chrome and Mr. Zahn as new members appointed by Governor Sisolak. Personally, I would like to thank each of you for being willing to serve on the forum, and I look forward to working with you all over the next two-year forecast cycle. Because we have two new members of the forum, I think it would be beneficial to have each member briefly introduce themselves. I will start with myself and then ask the other members to introduce themselves in the following order: Ms. Lewis, Mr. Levitt, Mr. Chrome, and Mr. Zahn. As I mentioned, my name is Linda Rosenthal. I have held various finance positions at IGT for the last 25 years and am currently a senior director in investor relations. I have served as a member of the Economic Forum for the past 14 years after first being appointed by Governor Gibbons in 2008. Now I'll turn the floor over to Ms. Lewis.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Lewis. I'm in development. I'm a third generation developer. Our company's been in Las Vegas for over 60 years. I actually don't remember how many years I've served, but I've been through, I think, 3 different Senate Majority Leaders on Economic Forum, so I'll just go with that. But I'm excited to meet our new guys, so this is excellent.
Marvin Levitt. I am retired, and I've been a CPA in Nevada since 1968. To give you a clue as to longevity, for most of my career, I was director of finance for the city of Las Vegas. My wife informs me we have 6 children and 23 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren, to give you a feel. So welcome the new members and happy to see all of you.
Hi, good morning, all. Michael Chrome. I currently serve as the Chief Financial Officer for the Las Vegas Raiders. My past is spent time in finance within several casino hospitality companies. I've been in Las Vegas since 2006, and I also serve on the governor's oversight panel for the convention center expansion.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vincent Zahn. I am presently SVP and Treasurer of Wynn Resort, where I am responsible for the capital markets, corporate finance, investor relations, and corporate treasury functions of the company. I've been with Wynn for about a little more than the past 3 years. Prior to that, I was at a company that was also based, here in Las Vegas in Nevada called Pinnacle Entertainment. I was there for 7 years, where I held a similar role at that company. Prior to that, I lived on the East Coast in the New York tri-state area, where I was an analyst on Wall Street covering the gaming, lodging, leisure, and hospitality sectors more broadly for about 10 years. I've lived in Nevada since 2011 when I joined Pinnacle, and that's my backstory. Pleasure to meet everyone, and I'm excited to be on the Economic Forum.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Mr. Ginden, as staff to the forum, asked if I would be willing to provide some initial comments regarding today's meeting before we proceed with the agenda. Given the schedules of several of the members and the requirement to hold a meeting on or before June 10th, it was necessary to hold today's meeting virtually. It is important to point out that there will not be any new general fund revenue forecast presented to the forum at this meeting. Therefore, we will not be considering or approving revised forecasts for fiscal years 2022 or 2023. We will receive information on how the fiscal year-to-date actual collections are tracking compared to the Economic Forum's general fund revenue forecast approved on May 4th, 2021. Mr. Ginden will provide additional information on this issue under agenda item number 9. Following public comment, we will elect a member to serve as chair and one to serve as vice chair for the next 2-year forecast cycle. David Schmidt, Chief Economist from the Research and Analysis Bureau at Dieter, will deliver a presentation on the current state employment and unemployment situation under agenda item number 7. We definitely appreciate Mr. Schmidt's willingness to once again present to the forum. After Mr. Schmidt's presentation, we will have presentations by staff on the type of information historically presented at the interim June meeting, as well as some administrative items in preparation for the fall meetings to be able to make the required on or before December 3rd forecast date for the approval of general fund revenue forecasts for fiscal years 2023, 2024, and 2025. We will also have a second public comment period at the end of the agenda. I would like to thank LCB's broadcast and production services staff for their assistance this morning. I realize it is a lot of work and appreciate them working with the members, presenters, staff, and the public to make it possible for us to hold this meeting today. At this point, I would like to ask if any of the other members have any opening comments they would like to make. It doesn't look like there are any desires to do so. Before proceeding to public comment, Mr. Ginden has asked to make some remarks under this agenda item for the benefit of the members and the public who follow the Economic Forum and its meetings. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Ginden.
Thank you, Ms. Rosenthal. And again, for the record, Russell Ginden with the Fiscal Analysis Division. And so I just would like to read some remarks to put into the record with regards to the Economic Forum's meeting today. So all meeting material for today's meeting can be accessed on the Economic Forum's page in NELIS, which is the Nevada Electronic Legislative Information System. That's located on the Nevada Legislature's website at www.leg.state.nv.us. Anyone who would like to receive an electronic notification regarding the Economic Forum's agendas, minutes, presentation material, and exhibits can do so by signing up on the legislature's website. There will be public comment period at the beginning and end of the meeting, and public comment will be limited to 2 minutes per person. Public comment may be provided in 4 different ways, all of which are listed on the agenda, but are as follows. By calling 669-900-6833, and then entering the meeting ID number 857-8788-5688, and then pressing the pound sign. Or by emailing to Economic Forum, one word, at lcb.state.nv.us. By mailing written comments to the Fiscal Analysis Division at 401 South Carson Street, Carson City, 8971. or finally by faxing to 775-684-6600. I would like to remind the members of the Economic Forum, presenters, and all other individuals in the Zoom meeting that the chat feature is only to be used for technical assistance with the BPS staff. It is not to be used for any communication between members, presenters, or other individuals in the meeting unless requesting technical assistance from BPS staff. If somebody uses the chat feature to chat during the meeting, the chair will ask the person to read into the record the information posted to the chat and remind everyone that the chat function is to be used exclusively to request technical assistance from BPS. Any links the presenter would like shared during the presentation should be included in their slide deck or other meeting materials provided to the committee and should not be sent to members through the chat feature. Thank you, Ms. Rosenthal. Those are the comments that staff wanted to make on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Gindin. So let's then proceed with the public comment. We'll open the line if BPS can help us for anybody who'd like to make a comment on the record.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rosenthal. Excuse me, your public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you. I believe that completes agenda item 3. So agenda item 4 is the election of chair and vice chair. Mr. Gindin, do you want to make comments here?
No, here just under the provisions for the Economic Forum, the statutory provisions, the members must elect a chair and vice chair from amongst the members. And so at this point in time, Ms. Rosenthal is acting chair. I think what we would do here is entertain a motion, and then we would need a second for that motion for chair. And then I will proceed to do a roll call vote, understanding that the person who is actually nominated and accepting that nomination can abstain from voting for themselves. And then after we have the election of the chair, we would move on to the vice chair and follow the same procedure. Thank you.
I would like to
Great.
make a motion that we elect Linda Rosenthal as chairman of the Economic Forum.
I would second that.
Any other comment or proposals? Okay, Mr. Gindin, do you want to proceed with the roll call vote?
I will, this all. Thank you. Mr. Chrome,
Aye.
Mr. Levitt,
Aye.
Ms. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Zahn,
Aye.
and Ms. Rosenthal.
I'll abstain. Okay,
Madam Chair, you've been elected, and so let the record show that Member Rosenthal has been elected chair of the Economic Forum by a unanimous vote of the 4 members voting, with Ms. Rosenthal abstaining.
thank you. I will now entertain a motion for the election of a vice chair.
I'll make a motion to, we select Jennifer Lewis as vice chairman.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
I second.
Any other comments or proposals? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Gindin, will you take a roll call vote for the appointment of Jennifer Lewis as vice chair?
Madam Chair, just so I can make sure I get it on the record, and then possibly going forward, it may be beneficial to everyone if you identify yourself for speaking. So it was me that the motion for Ms. Lewis as vice chair was made by Member Levitt, and it was seconded by, was it
Second by Vincent Zahn. Apologies for that.
Mr. Zahn? Okay. And so with that, we'll call the roll. Member, Mr. Crone,
Aye.
Mr. Levitt,
Aye.
Ms. Lewis,
Abstain.
Mr. Zahn,
Aye.
Chair Rosenthal.
Aye.
Madam Chair, let the record show that the motion to elect Member Lewis as vice chair was approved 4-0 with the 4 members voting unanimously and Ms. Lewis abstaining.
Thank you, Russell. I believe that concludes agenda item 4. So moving on to agenda item 5, approval of the minutes from our December 7th, 2021 meeting of the Economic Forum. Do I have a motion? Or actually, before we take a motion, any comments or changes that need to be made to the minutes?
I'll make a motion for approval of the minutes.
I'll second that motion. Marvin.
Great. Do we want to do a roll call vote, Russell?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And again, let the record show that the motion was made by Vice Chair Lewis and seconded by Mr. Levitt. And so we'll call the roll call vote. Mr. Chrome,
Aye.
Mr. Levitt,
Aye.
Mr. Zahn,
Aye.
Vice Chair Lewis,
Aye.
Chair Rosenthal.
Aye.
Madam Chair, let the record show that the minutes under agenda item 5 are approved unanimously by all members of the forum.
Thank you. At this time, Mr. Ginden, I'd like to ask if there are any agenda items you'd like to take out of order, just in case we were to somehow lose connection to the majority or the quorum of the members here, or if you'd rather proceed in order.
I think I'm willing to proceed in order here. It looks like we're all pretty well hooked up technologically. So I will watch, and Madam Chair, I appreciate you making that comment and asking the question. I will point out for all the members in attendance that staff will be monitoring and watching the meeting closely. Because it must maintain a quorum, that is at least 3 members at all times to be able to have the meeting proceed. So if we see that we're losing anybody, then we may ask, or BPS staff will let us know that there are issues going on. And thus, Madam Chair, then we may have to pause. And then it may be advisable to actually place the economic forum in recess till we can get things hooked back up. But given that it looks like we're all pretty well hooked up, I'm willing to just proceed. And so then the next agenda item is agenda item 6, the
Yes, the agenda item number 6, the overview of the Economic Forum and the Technical Advisory Committee on future state revenues. Mr. Ginden, did you want to address this item?
Yes, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Russell Ginden with the Fiscal Analysis Division. I thought just generally we have this as an item on the agenda for the June meeting, which is the first meeting that's in paneling the new economic forum for the next 2-year forecast cycle. Madam Chair, I may say add a few additional remarks, given that we have 2 new members compared to what staff would normally provide under this agenda item. For context, prior to the economic forum being put in place by legislation approved during the 1993 session in SB 23, with the late Senator Raggio being the primary sponsor of that legislation in the 1993 session. The general fund revenue forecast process for the state budget was, as I understand it, because it precedes my tenure with the state, was that the governor and his staff, in developing the executive budget that would be submitted to the legislature for consideration, they would develop their own general fund revenue forecast on which then the budget was built and then submit that to the legislature. Then as the budget worked its way through the legislative session, then the legislature could make adjustments to that forecast as the revenues that would be used to develop the legislatively approved budget. So I don't know that one has to necessarily be a student of political science or budgeting to know what could potentially go on situations like that. So thus the legislature made the decision to have the statutory process that is known as the Economic Forum approved, as I said, in SB 23. The provisions for the economic forum are actually codified in the Nevada revised statutes, that is NRS, and it's in provisions NRS 353.226 through NRS 353.229. And I'll just go through sort of the highlights, which I think at this point in time, clearly three of you are quite familiar with, and as well as some information has been provided to the two new members. But under the statutory provisions, the governor is required to appoint all 5 members of the Economic Forum to a 2-year term, which has been stated. 1 member is actually nominated by the majority leader of the Senate, and 1 member is nominated by the Speaker of the Assembly. So thus, and you can see the leadership of each house of the legislature has 1 person on the Economic Forum. And then the governor has 3 that can be selected to be appointed. On its face, the Economic Forum, thus what is intended to be a non-political and nonpartisan entity in terms of their role is to produce unrestricted general fund revenue forecasts. Under the statutory provisions, the Economic Forum is required on or before December 3rd of even-numbered years to produce a forecast for all unrestricted general fund revenue forecasts. That forecast is required to be used by the governor in developing the executive budget that will be submitted to the legislature for consideration in each odd-numbered year session. And pursuant to statute, the Economic Forum is required to produce a revised forecast if necessary on or before May 1st of the odd-numbered years. That forecast then is used by the legislature in developing the legislatively approved general fund budget. As was stated, the Economic Forum, when it's preparing these forecasts for the December even-numbered years and May odd-numbered year forecast periods, they're preparing a forecast for the current fiscal year that you're in, as well as a forecast for the next biennium. So thus you're preparing a forecast for the current fiscal year, 1 fiscal year ahead and 2 fiscal year aheads, or that next biennium for which the general fund budget is being prepared and then will be approved by the legislature and then hopefully signed by the governor. So that was the original 1993 legislation for the Economic Forum and their forecast duties. In 2011, a bill, AB 332, was introduced and passed. That was the bill that then required the Economic Forum on or before June 10th of even-numbered years and on or before December 10th of odd-numbered years to conduct interim meetings. As was stated by Chair Rosenthal, the statute does not require the Economic Forum to consider or approve revised general fund revenue forecasts at those interim meetings. The interim meetings are more to get an update on how the actual collections are comparing the forecast, as well as get updates on the economic conditions going on or other issues that members of the Economic Forum working with the chair think would be an informational item worth bringing forward and being presented to the members of the Economic Forum. So then also at the June meeting, you can see that's the first meeting after the governor has impaneled the new forum. Thus, at that meeting, we have certain administrative and housekeeping duties that need to be conducted, such as the election of the chair and vice chair, as well as we work through the other agenda items. You'll see those are start to set the stage for the preliminary working of the October, November, and December meetings to work towards that approval of the forecast on or before December 3rd, 2022. As part of the statutory provisions for the Economic Forum, there is a body called, it's called the Technical Advisory Committee on Future State Revenues. We simply refer to it as TAC, T-A-C, because that's much easier to say than what I just said. And so under the statutory provisions in NRS 353.229, the TAC consists of the Senate and Assembly fiscal analysts from the Fiscal Analysis Division in which I work, the chief of the Budget Division of the Governor's Office of Finance, the head of the research division of the Employment Security Division of the Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation. And it's possibly just easier to say that that's David Schmidt, who will be making the presentation to us here in the next agenda item. The Vice Chancellor of Finance for the Nevada System of Higher Education, that is NCHE. The State Demographer, who is an employee of the Department of Taxation, and the Chair of the Committee on Local Government Finance. And so the TAC is the 7-member body that is by statute required to provide assistance to the Economic Forum as directed by the Economic Forum. And you can see we have an agenda item here where we'll go through a little bit more detail of the TAC and the Economic Forum, and staff working with the body today to get direction to provide to the staff, to the TAC. And then by statute, the Legislative Counsel Bureau and the Budget Division of the Governor's Office of Finance are jointly required to provide staff services to the Economic Forum and the Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC. And thus, that's the role that I'm serving here as staff of the Fiscal Analysis Division of the Legislative Counsel Bureau. And so I believe, Madam Chair, those were the comments that I felt were necessary for making under this agenda item. And if any of the members have any questions, I can attempt to address them here now.
Thank you, Mr. Ginden. Any questions from anybody before we move forward? Okay. So now we'll turn to agenda item number 7, which is our presentation on the state employment and unemployment outlook from David Schmidt, Chief Economist, Research and Analysis Bureau of the Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation. Welcome, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Chair Rosenthal, and members of the forum. I'm going to be distracted for a moment while I pull up my PowerPoint here. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. I will try to be brief and also comprehensive. So for both the new and existing members of the forum, please feel free to interrupt me and stop me if you have a question. I'm really here to try to help give you some foundation in what we're seeing and what we're expecting in terms of employment and unemployment in the economy. And also wanted to say congratulations for evidently being in the 30th year anniversary next year of the Economic Forum. It's an exciting sort of milestone to be hitting. For the record, to repeat everything, my name is David Schmidt. I am the Chief Economist for the Research and Analysis Bureau, which I guess is the successor agency for the Research Division within Employment Security, because we are within DETR itself, so that structure has changed a little bit in the time that we've been here. But the themes that I kind of wanted to talk about today, obviously, Nevada's gone through a lot of turmoil in the last several years as we went through the pandemic. Nevada had the highest unemployment rate that any state has seen going back to 1976 when records began. With the current process of thinking about the unemployment rate, we had nearly 30% unemployment in April of 2020. The really remarkable thing as we've come through the pandemic is how fast everything went up, how fast everything came down. So we've seen incredibly large shock in an incredibly compressed period of time. And in most areas that we look at, the effect of that is almost like dumping gasoline on whatever sort of trends were already in place. Lots of things accelerated very quickly, and I think there's a lot of change that's still kind of working its way through the system. But at a high level, employment in the state is essentially back to pre-pandemic levels. We're not quite to total non-farm employment being what it was. But we're like 99-point-something% of the way there. So we're essentially recovering. Total private sector employment as of April actually exceeds total private sector employment prior to the pandemic. And so we're in the process of recovering there. Unemployment currently at 5%. It's relatively low. 5% once upon a time would have been full employment. Everything is humming along, though the United States is at 3.6. So we are elevated compared to the US. We're not down to the all-time lows of the 3.6, 3.8% that we had prior to the pandemic, but we're at what's normally considered a pretty good unemployment rate. We're just higher than the US. Unemployment claims are at multi-decade lows. If you think about how many people are filing for unemployment insurance benefits in a particular month, you have to go back to about 1990 to find comparable months in terms of how low the level of claims are. And as we know, Nevada in 1990 was a lot smaller state than it is today. And so the absolute number is that low is really telling about the relatively low share of people collecting unemployment benefits. But the trend is very similar if you just sort of removed the years that were affected by the pandemic. Coming out of the recovery from the Great Recession, you have kind of a steady downslope. And the numbers that we're seeing today are essentially a continuation of that trend, not noticeably higher or lower. And as most people know, if you look at the rates of job turnover that we're seeing, whether it's quits, whether it's job openings, whether it's hires, total separations, the trends that we see in hourly wages generally are pointing to a really tight labor market where you have a lot of demand chasing not as many jobs. So to take a look at the industry mix, I will apologize, depending on the size of your screen, some of these numbers may become pretty small and unreadable. Highly recommend referring to the printed materials too. But in general, if you look down the left column here, you've got some red and green numbers. This shows the net change in jobs from February of 2020, right before the pandemic, to April 22, which is our most recent data. As I said, total non-farm jobs is down 4,100 jobs, but it's very nearly recovered. Total private sector is up 2,400 jobs. Where you see the really big dislocation is in accommodation and food service and leisure and hospitality. So casino hotels in Las Vegas continue to be the area that's really the most affected by the pandemic. Our total jobs is down 4,000, but accommodation and food service is down 31,000, 32,000 jobs. There's a pretty big disconnect there. Where we've seen a lot of growth is in transportation and warehousing, which is up 18,500 jobs, and the broader trade, transportation, utility sector, which is up 24,000 jobs. And so there has been a shift in the overall mix of jobs in the economy. The areas where we're down the most are outside of casino hotels. If you look at other services, which is the catch-all other services, includes things like barbers or dog groomers or just any other sort of personal services that don't fall into another category. That's down, and government, which is down 6,500 jobs. And so the private sector has recovered. All jobs have not recovered because government, which includes federal, state, and local government, has not recovered. Federal government has, state and local government haven't. And that does include both like the universities as well as local school districts. The next two charts are even more unreadable because they include more industries. I'll note for the local areas, this is not seasonally adjusted, so we do get a broader mix of jobs. But just to point out that in Las Vegas, the story is pretty similar. The recovery is a little bit weaker. Casino hotels is still the most affected area. And if you look at Reno, the Reno area actually has recovered all of its jobs. It hit the pre-pandemic or post-pandemic peak in October of last year and has been growing a little bit since then. Total recovery there is 8,100 jobs in total non-farm and 9,500 jobs in the total private sector. Even in Reno, though, the casino hotel industry down 2,600 jobs is the most affected industry. That's true north or south. It's a common theme that we've had coming out of the pandemic. This chart looks at the total recovery by sector. So the color represents the recovery of compared to where it was in February of 2020. So more green is more recovered, more red is less recovered. And I'll just highlight the two brightest colors. With transportation, warehousing, utilities is at 21% above what it was before the pandemic. That represents about 6.8% of total jobs in the state. The accommodation industry is at 80% of what it was prior to the pandemic. And so it's still down. About 1 out of every 5 jobs in all of accommodation that were there prior to the pandemic are not there after the pandemic. That is not necessarily to say that this industry isn't trying to hire, but the total employment isn't necessarily recovering. So is it supply side, is it demand side? That's harder to say, but that total level of jobs coming out of the pandemic, we did benefit from some revisions to the data in 2021. The trend had been pretty flat. We got a big bump at the end of 2021, but the trend so far in 2022 has resumed to being pretty flat coming out of the pandemic and the recession from it. Other areas you can see have recovered more or less. Manufacturing is 8.4% above, government is 4% below. It's interesting to me, if you look, we often talk about accommodation and food service is one of the broad sectors in the economy, but accommodation and food service are acting very differently. That by itself is a very broad industry. It includes both Caesars and McDonald's. But if you split apart accommodation and food service is actually up 4.2% compared to before the pandemic. It's just that accommodation industry that's been really, really hit and not recovering as fast as any other sector of the economy. Looking at the supply and demand, and one of the really hot topics right now is wage pressure and inflation and the need that employers have to be raising wages to compete for workers in this environment. This data takes a look at wage changes over the year. I take a 3-month average to smooth out some of the volatility, but it is a monthly data point that we get. It's only for a few sectors, and so it's not super detailed, but I think you can see some broad trends. The 2 colors of lines represent 2 different types of workers who are counted. In red, you have the average hourly earnings for all employees. In blue, you have the average hourly earnings for production employees. This is just what the Bureau of Labor Statistics produces, but I wanted to try to capture as many sectors as we could. In gray, you have the change that's been experienced. It's the 20th to 80th percentile for other states. And so I think it's helpful to see not just what fluctuations are we seeing, but what are the trends more broadly and how does Nevada compare? One of the interesting ones for me is if you look at the construction industry, which is the top left, you can see that we're actually floating around 0, which is considerably lower than what's happening in other states. And so we've seen less hourly wage increases in construction industry than most other states. In comparison, if you look at the top right, you have the leisure and hospitality industry. And here you can see first that all states have seen a pretty sharp increase in this industry. This is generally more lower paid work. And so where you have that competition for workers, there's been a larger response to try to increase the wages and probably be more competitive in trying to attract workers there in all states. And even with that increase, Nevada's increase is higher yet. We're above that 80th percentile mark for other states. Part of this is probably our mix in employment. Nevada historically has a lot more employment in accommodation, which tends to have about 50% higher wages than food service. And because we have that higher mix, our average wage tends to be a bit higher. And so you might be seeing some of that here, but it's definitely clear that there is competition and sharp increases in wages taking place in that industry, up about 15% over the year as of the most recent data, which is for April. But one other area where we're kind of high, if you look at professional and business services, you also see that nearly 15% increase for Nevada, also considerably above the 80th percentile that we see in other states for that industry. But as I said at the top, a very tight labor market, lots of competition for workers. Another data point that we have is the BLS job openings and labor turnover survey, or JOLTS data. This data is only current through March right now. It'll get updated at the end of the month. But the top table here shows the absolute numbers that we're seeing in Nevada. The bottom table shows the rate of change, which allows us to compare between states. Earlier this year, Nevada's hire rate was #1 in the country coming into the end of the year. We've moderated a little bit there. So our hire rate is only about in the middle of all of the states, but that's not to say that it's low. Compared to total employment, we have a hire rate of about 5%. So 1 out of every 20 workers was in the state was hired into a new job. That's a pretty rapid pace of change. It's not our all-time low of 3%. It's not our all-time high of 12%, which we saw as jobs came flooding back right after the original shutdown of non-essential businesses. You can see just how often June of 2020 or March of 2020, the pandemic is the all-time high, all-time low for a lot of these series. So we've moderated, but I think one of the numbers that people talk about here a lot is first job openings and just how many job openings we're seeing. That 7.3%, there's that many openings compared to total employment in March of 2020, or 2022 rather. So there's a very high pace of job openings, and that's only number 22 in the nation. Like there is a very high level of job openings. You can see in the top, that's 140 or 114,000 job openings in Nevada in that month. To put that in a little bit of context, I think it's interesting to look at total employment and total job openings. I will say these are two different estimates, looking at two different points in time. They're not necessarily comparable, but just for the sake of trying to think about it this way, if you stack the two together, it's interesting to think of this as what overall demand for labor looks like, both people who are working and the jobs that employers want to have, the openings that they're reporting. And if you look at it this way, you can see that currently in Nevada, the demand for labor is the highest it's ever been. We're seeing that employment plus job openings north of 1.5 million, and it's at the series peak. It's a little bit above, but not too far above where we were prior to the pandemic. And so we are still seeing that demand for labor growing, and that's putting a lot of pressure on the labor market. At the same time, unemployment is, as I said, low. You can see here just how far we've come and the broad trend we have with the United States, where unemployment rates have come down. And typically in recovery, what we see is the unemployment rate drifts lower over time. We're probably at the point where we shouldn't be expecting dramatic changes. There's a lot of trend with some general lowering of unemployment as time goes on. That's my expectation for really until we get to the next recession, is that we will continue to drift lower in that regard, similar to what we see in the US as a whole. Where Nevada is a little bit different from other states, again, gray area being 20th to 80th percentile for other states. You can tell I'm kind of fond of this way of doing some comparisons because I think looking at that, where we are compared to the range of other states is a lot more informative than where Nevada is compared to just one number for the US as a whole, because I think it shows some of the diversity of experience amongst the states. This looks at two measures kind of squished together. I'm looking at the total number of people who have been unemployed 15 weeks or longer, which is one of the alternative measures of labor underutilization that BLS has, and comparing that to total unemployment in the state as a whole. And that ratio gives us a sense of what share of our unemployed workers are in this longer term category. And you can see that Nevada in the housing boom, as well as the pandemic, has a considerably higher share of longer term unemployed workers compared to the US as a whole. This is a 12-month average through the first quarter of 2022. And so it's incorporating some of that as we're coming out of the pandemic impact. But I think this is probably going to continue to be true, where we have more people because of the dislocation from the casino industry and the challenges that people are facing coming back to work, where there is this kind of longer term unemployment in our population. If we were down at what the other 80th percentile states are experiencing, not even down all the way to the median, but just that 80th percentile amount, this would actually bring our unemployment to basically what the US is as a whole. And so where we're higher than the US, it's really in this longer term unemployment category, because we have this much higher share of people who have been unemployed for a longer period of time. Another trend that we see in the state is that our labor force participation rate has been falling over time. If you look back into the 80s or 90s, you can see Nevada had very high participation. As Nevada has matured as a state, we've sort of grown into being not the flash explosion growing by 6% every year like we were decades ago, but acting a little bit more normal and attracting more retirees, especially to the Las Vegas area. You've seen that participation rate fall, where we have lower participation in the 2000s. You can see the decline in participation as we come out of the Great Recession. The rise that we saw as we hit the boom before the pandemic, and then the impact where we've fallen and are just starting to recover. But we're not completely below what any other state has experienced. We're definitely at the lower end now instead of the higher end where we historically were. And if you break this out, this data only runs 2015 to 2019 because of some limitations, but it's a demographic breakout of unemployment with impossibly small to read text. Sorry about that. But some of the interesting trends for me, in blue, you have Washoe County, in red, you have Clark County. And you can see the general relationship between those two counties over time. But also in the top two rows of the chart, you have the breakout in participation by age. And again, the dashed line is the median for all US states. And we're kind of comparing the two counties to that experience of other states. And through about age 54, you can see in 2019, we're either in Clark County about at the median experience for other states, in Washoe County generally above. But as you move into the 55 to 59, 60 to 64, 65 to 74, and 75 plus categories, which are the middle four boxes in the second row, you can see that participation rate, especially in Clark County, is getting lower. And I think this is in part kind of a Sunbelt effect, whereas we're attracting more retirees and people who might not want to be participating to the labor force, we're seeing, especially in Las Vegas, that participation rate get a little bit lower. And so I think this is part of what's happening, is because we're attracting a different population to Nevada over time. I think that's having an impact on our participation rate. If you look at the working age population, either 20 to 64 or 25 to 64, we're closer to the median. If you look across a lot of different demographic groups, we tend to be pretty close to the median. There are some groups that are a little bit lower, but for the forum's purposes, I think just thinking about what the population is and how likely is the population of Nevada to be working or not working, I think those highest level trends, especially with regard to age, are probably the most informative. But if there's any questions, or if you really want me to talk even longer about this, I totally could. One more trend before I get to forward-looking projections is unemployment claims. As I said, they're at multi-decade lows. You can see obviously in the third column here, the change over the year from 2021 to 2022, negative 80%, down 85, 84, 90, 82. Like the trend is much, much, much lower in 2022 than 2021, and much more back to normal. Our average benefits are up. The average duration is falling. The number of people exhausting their benefits is really low. The bottom two rows I think are really interesting. The average duration of benefits historically, I've been with the department since 2005. And so in my head, average duration is almost fixed in stone at about 13 weeks of benefits. It was 13.3, 13.5. It doesn't tend to change a whole lot. So that duration is up. That we're at 17 weeks is still, to me, kind of almost shockingly high, except that it was at 23 weeks a year ago. So we are still seeing that kind of longer duration of unemployment still being experienced, even though the absolute number of people in the system is pretty low. On the other hand, our exhaustion rate, which is the number of people who use up all of their available benefits, and so they don't exit the system and find a job prior to exhausting those benefits. That's actually kind of low. And these two numbers seem a bit weird, because we have both longer term unemployment, but also fewer people exhausting. I don't necessarily have a conclusion to draw from that, but normally I expect the exhaustion rate to be about 33, 35%. We're seeing 28%, not hugely lower, but lower than I would normally expect to see. And I think that probably shows that we have part of the challenge of longer term unemployment is conditions for people going back to work. Like, do they have the supports that they need? Do they have the tools that they need to be able to go back to work? And I think unemployment benefits may still, even for this small share of people, be helping to be a support while people are trying to find the job that will meet the needs that they have, whether it's childcare or working conditions, hours, commute, anything like that. And so I think that's kind of the landscape that we have. I will briefly put this up in case anyone wants to see the various services that we have, but I have another presentation just because I was trying to get everything out in time to get everything distributed, but about 4 or 5 more slides looking at employment projections. But if anyone wants to ask a question while I'm doing that, feel free, so you get the opportunity to do so.
David, could I ask you a question about warehousing?
Certainly.
That seems to be a really growth category. in the state recently, you know, sort of the planning that what we've had in the accommodations area. And I'm wondering about, since that's sort of new to us, what would we expect to see employment-wise in that area if we had, instead of a growth in the economy, if we had to go into a recession? Is that more stable, less stable, or what would you anticipate that area to be?
I would probably lean toward more stable. It probably depends on the type of recession, as with everything. Like in the pandemic, I think one of the really interesting trends was because people were staying home more, there was a lot more online, you know, e-commerce, buying things online. And so there was a lot more demand. It actually kind of increased the demand for this infrastructure to support that online shopping experience. And so if, in a completely hypothetical, not saying that I expect this, but if gas prices got so high that it really crimped the economy and people couldn't easily go out, you might see that same impact where people are like, you know what, I don't want to go driving around to buy everything. I want to let someone do the driving and bring it to me. You might see that same impact where you need that infrastructure to support the delivery taking place. On the other hand, high gas prices might mean that shipping costs have to go up and those charges get passed on to consumers. Maybe you actually see the opposite impact where people are like, no, I don't want to pay that cost for shipping. I'll just go out and get it myself. So you could go either direction, but I think a lot depends on the conditions. The 2001 recession was more dot-com bubble and then the impact of 9/11. I don't think that would have a huge impact on warehousing either way. If you're thinking about something like the 2007 recession, where you're looking at the housing sector and the huge hit that we had there, because of the rollout into how that hit affected consumers more broadly, because we lost 2/3 of the construction industry and all of those high-paying jobs, as well as the general sense of wealth and income that people had due to the inflation of housing prices. That really hit consumer spending. And I think that piece of it, if you're hitting consumer spending or sentiment, if you're hitting the logistics, like the need for manufacturing and logistics support, if those areas of the economy are being hit, then I would think warehousing will see a dive. But I think it's probably a bit less exposed than, say, leisure and entertainment more broadly. I think that's something that tends to be like, when the economy is hot, it's really up, and when the economy is down, it's a lot more down. So I think that might tend to be a bit more volatile than warehousing. Is that a long and rambling answer to your question?
No, I appreciate that. You know, I'm kind of happy that we don't see that construction's making up such a huge percentage of the growth in the labor force the way we did back in the early 2000s, you know, in the 2006, 2007 you made reference to.
Yeah, I very much, David Schmidt again for the record, I would agree with that sentiment. It's one reason why I feel better about where we are, even with some concern about a potential recession looming in the future because of inflation and the Fed and everything else, that our construction industry is not 150,000 jobs. We're just getting back to about 100,000 jobs, and we're not accelerating rapidly. We've been pretty steady in that area. I think that was one of the biggest contributors to why Nevada was hit so hard in the Great Recession, and that we're not kind of overweight. We are still catching up in that industry. And actually, if you look at the longer term employment trend, we're about where we were in the early 2000s before the housing boom really took off. And so that's about the level of construction employment we have. If anything, we might be a little bit below where we would want to be in light of all of the demand for construction that's currently in place in the economy. But I think we're less exposed to that collapsing the way that it did in 2007, even in light of rising interest rates and the cooling off of the housing market in Nevada.
Do you have a feel for the people that have lost the jobs in the accommodation industry? Have they, I suppose they make up some of the long-term unemployment, but I assume probably some of those have either, the lost jobs in that area have either moved on to other areas of the economy or moved out of state? Do you have any feel for where that all stands?
David Schmidt again for the record. I think broadly, it's kind of similar to what we've seen in prior periods, in that some people have gone back, some people have gone to related industries, some people have probably left the workforce, either gone to another state or simply retired, and some people are probably facing other barriers to employment. So I've done some really preliminary comparisons of people who were experienced some form of separation in 2020 and what their employment status was in 2021, and compared that to the same industries for 2018 and 2019 to try to get a sense of what's the baseline level of activity and what are we seeing today. In each case, I got somewhere in the ballpark of 40 to 50,000 individuals. And so I was a little bit surprised that I didn't see a larger share. But part of that is probably a limitation on the data that I have, which is only looking at, did you have any wages at all in a calendar quarter? And so someone who was, say, let go in March and then got reemployed in June, even though they had a few months of separation, they don't look like a separation if you're looking only at quarterly data. So there's some pretty big caveats to this. But of those people who had any separation, most people go back to the same industry, accommodation or food service. I'm looking at this at that 3-digit. So accommodation as an industry, food service as an industry, temporary help services as an industry, and then some other things. But looking at separations from accommodation, most people go back to accommodation, and that's true in both periods. Of those who don't go back to accommodation, the next highest share generally goes into food service. So it's kind of really closely related industries. And that's true in both periods. And then the next largest is sort of temporary health services, and then sort of diffuse throughout the rest of the economy. And so that trend is largely true in both cases. Where we were a bit higher in 2020 than 2018 is that there is a somewhat larger share, maybe on the order of about 10% of the total, that are not showing up in any wage records. So that could be that they've left the state or that they just aren't working in the most recent period that I was comparing to. This data only goes through about second or third quarter of 2021, and so it's not all the way up to the present because there's a big lead time on getting that data. But we probably have had a somewhat of an increase in that, not in the labor force, either due to moving, due to retiring, or due to want to work but facing some sort of barriers that just are preventing them from being able to find any sort of job. What I don't think is happening is that they're all like collecting unemployment or other sorts of benefits, because we haven't seen a really big spike there. Instead, we're at very low levels overall. And so for whatever reason, be it retirement, relocation, or barriers to employment, there has been a bit of a bump there, but most people who had a separation have gone back to work in some capacity. So this is kind of the remaining balance there, which kind of partially answers the question, maybe not completely.
Okay, thank you. Could you bring us up to date on where do we currently stand on the status of the unemployment insurance fund?
So the David Schmidt for the record, the Unemployment Trust Fund is money that's collected from employers, for those who don't know, through unemployment taxes, and it goes into a special dedicated fund to pay for benefits. Prior to the pandemic, we had about $2 billion in this fund, which was estimated to be about a year and a half worth of benefits at a recession like we saw in the Great Recession. Instead, we got the COVID recession. That fund was depleted in December of 2020. And so even though we went through like Great Depression level hit to the economy, we still went about 6 to 8 months before we depleted that trust fund, but it did run out of funds in December of 2020. There is a permanent provision in Social Security law, Title 12, which provides for essentially unlimited loans from the federal government to states to continue paying unemployment benefits. We tapped that from roughly December until about May, borrowing a little bit less than $350 million, I think, in the process. We received some loans through some of the federal, not a loan, but essentially a grant from the federal stimulus. which the governor and legislature decided to use to repay that loan and bring us back up to zero to prevent some increased federal taxes on employers. Since then, contributions have continued to come in. Currently, the fund sits at about a little over $600 million, which is not the $2 billion we had before the pandemic, but it is making progress to restoring the trust fund. In contrast, we're paying under $3 million a week right now in benefits. So at current levels, we have almost 4 years worth of benefits in that reserve, but really the goal of that fund would be to build up reserves to get to the point where in a future recession, we are able to absorb that impact, hopefully without needing to raise taxes on employers. And so those loans have been paid off. There's no potential interest or other federal charges due to states that have outstanding balances. In contrast, I think California has about $17 billion in loans still to the feds. So we're rebuilding that fund. We are cash flow positive in terms of total benefits paid out and total contributions being paid. And so the outlook for that fund is to probably continue to grow depending on the tax rates that are set at in the annual process, which takes place in between October and December of each year.
Thank you. You know, it almost looks like, I'll just make a comment here, is that given some changes we've seen in our economy, we are probably through a normal recession. I'm not talking about some of these strange ones like from COVID, but through a normal recession, perhaps we're getting actually a little bit better protected than we have been in the past. Would that be a statement you think might be accurate?
David Schmidt, for the record, I definitely think so. I think Nevada was in a better place going into the COVID recession because we had built up that money. I think that it was a active decision by the Employment Security Council to try to build that fund up. And I think it's a credit to the way that process ran, that we went through the biggest impact any state has ever seen in terms of unemployment. And we still went from April through December before we had to borrow any money because we had that healthy of a reserve and that sort of posture going in. Other states had to borrow much more quickly than we did. And I think that also helps achieve the part of the purpose of the trust fund is providing more stability to employers. Heading into the pandemic, the average tax rate on employers was at 1.65%. Coming out of the pandemic, the average tax rate on employers is at 1.65% with no surcharges, no interest fees, no federal unemployment tax increases. So we actually managed to hit that objective of fiscal stability through the entire course of the pandemic. That also involved getting some money, the governor and legislature appropriating money from the American Rescue Plan, I think, funds to repay that $300 million in loans. But in contrast, in the Great Recession, we took on, in a smaller recession, almost $850 million in loans. And so because we went in with a more secure fund, a slightly higher average tax rate on employers, we were able to maintain that stability through the course of the whole pandemic.
Thank you. I won't bother you anymore.
I can do this all day.
Hi, David. This is Vincent Zahn. So this data is very interesting to me, right? We have demand for labor at or near an all-time high. We have unemployment at or near an interim low on this map. We have long-term unemployment at an interim high, and labor force participation sorting toward the low end of what we would consider normal. So this is obviously a labor market that there's a lot of friction and dislocation in. I guess my question is, and I don't know if this is the right forum to ask this, obviously, as a new member, I'll try anyway. Are there any sort of macro or high-level policy recommendations you would make where we can reduce some of the friction in the system, encourage workforce participation, redistribute, the workforce, to areas where demand is highest for labor? Any thoughts there, any recommendations there would be appreciated.
So David Schmidt again for the record, and I'll probably keep this kind of generic. I will say these are some common slides that I tend to share with in other forums like the Governor's Workforce Development Boards, industry sector councils, and just within the department here, because these are very good questions and they are definitely hard to answer. I think part of any solution is ultimately a person getting a job is a small scale match. It's a person and it's a job and making those connections. I think part of what we're seeing is any recovery takes time. In a normal recession, you sort of flow in and flow out over the course of several years. You don't have 3% unemployment, 30% unemployment, 5% unemployment in such a really, really compressed period of time. I think that time scale is a huge part of the challenge that we're facing in the numbers that we're currently seeing, where it takes time for a person to get connected with a job in, say, the childcare industry, and then for a parent to be able to place their kid into that childcare so that they are then equipped to go out and be able to work. And so the economy is a incredibly complex web of individual interactions, and I think the time that it takes for those interactions to sort out is part of the challenge. It's ultimately working with individual workers and individual employers and trying to find those matches. I do think one of my generic things that I like to throw out, especially in a tight labor market, is it's a great opportunity for employers to look for the chance to recruit people who other employers might be overlooking. And so I think that your people who generally have higher barriers to employment, or people with disabilities, or people with scheduling needs, wherever possible, if you're able to recruit someone that another employer isn't also chasing, you have the opportunity to potentially find individuals that are highly motivated to work, and they just need some additional supports. And one reason I love being a part of the Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation is that that's our mission, is to help connect people, connect workers, connect employers, and find those meaningful career wins. But as far as broad solutions, I think there's a lot of individual bits and pieces, but trying to connect each dot one at a time, and probably just giving a little bit of time for that web of supports to come into place to help support career outcomes for people.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get to the last little bit of my presentation here. Thank you for your patience. I love this stuff and I could really go on all day. This is really going to be focused on sort of forward-looking, especially for employment. As far as unemployment and labor force, I have sort of my general expectations here. I think the broad trend in employment is going to be kind of returning to normal trends in terms of labor force and employment growth. I'm not really expecting to see that 80% number jump up a whole lot for accommodation. The accommodation industry has been pretty flat for a while. If you look at casino hotels in Las Vegas, employment there peaked in about 2006, and in Reno it peaked in 1997. So the broad trend coming out of recessions has been either flat or seeing some job loss and then a less than complete recovery. Given that our current trends are pretty flat, I kind of expect pretty flat to be the case in the near term, with I think our long-term projections might be eventually creeping up back toward where we are right now. I do think that labor force participation is in part being driven down nationally due to large demographic trends like the aging of the baby boom population. And because I think part of what we're seeing in Nevada is people who want to retire moving to Nevada for the experience that we can offer them. I think that will push down our participation relative to other states. If you look, we're actually pretty similar to states like Arizona and Florida in terms of that 60-ish% participation rate. And so I think that will be a bigger part of our structure going forward. With regard to labor markets, I do expect them to remain pretty tight. I expect unemployment to remain pretty low. and generally slide down over the next several years without a large change in that activity. We do a few different types of projections with regard to employment in our office. We do formal, as a part of one of our federal grants, short and long-term projections, which are either 2 or 10 years. These all go from a specific base year to a period in the future. So our short-term projections right now are from 2021 as our base year in June to June of 2023. So I'm not really going to talk about these because the forum is thinking a little bit further out in the future. And 1 year from now is, I think, just too short a time horizon to be of much use to you, especially when you're thinking about the next biennium. We also do our 10-year projections. These are intended to be more business cycle neutral, but what's the long-term trend in an industry? So these go currently, what we're working on, I will say these are also preliminary. We're not finalizing them until I think the first week of July. But we do have our at least preliminary industry forecasts, and so I've included some of those here. But these go from June of 2020 to June of 2020 or 2030. And so these are growing from June of 2020, which was obviously a period where we were still right in the middle of the pandemic. And so some of the growth that's reflected here is that pandemic rebound. Even though they're business cycle neutral, going from the very bottom of the biggest spike we've ever seen isn't really we don't want to just say, well, continue the trend from there, because we do have more current information. And I'm also including some more informal models. This is just sort of plug the series into an auto ARIMA or exponential trend smoothing model and see sort of what comes out for how might this go? And it gives us another way of thinking about what's going on. This is modeled on monthly data, not quarterly data, just because I'm trying to go from where we are right now, what's kind of the future that we might be expecting. And that's also a model of modeled data. And so where the model tends to maybe smooth out the individual fluctuations we might see, I think these models probably get a lot of that smoothing incorporated as well. Looking at some of our long-term projections, I will say this is just a piece of it. I think we have 80 three-digit industries. I accidentally duplicated food services and drinking places here, which you'll see, but I just pulled out a few industries that I thought would be interesting or worthwhile. If you want to see a fuller list of what our industry projections are, we could certainly make those available. In yellow here, I highlighted the total all industry projection, which has us at employment in 2030 of about little over 1.6 million for an annualized growth rate of 2.3%. Some industries clearly well above that. Because we're going from June of 2020, accommodation has a really high growth rate, but remember that's from the very low point of the pandemic. Even with 181,000 jobs in 2030, that's still not fully recovered to where we were going into the pandemic, which was I think a bit closer to 200,000 jobs. Where we expect to see the most growth is in this nursing and residential care facilities with 5.8% growth from 2020 to 2030. Some of this is pandemic related. Some of this is also longer term demographic trend related. On the slightly slower side, compared to the all industry average, you have food services and drinking places basically right on trend. Education and health services growing slightly slower than trend. Mining and manufacturing being a little bit slower. And then credit, I picked this one just because it was one of the lowest, was credit intermediation and related activities with the sort of slowing of the housing market, not seeing necessarily an awful lot of growth there. Looking at some of the informal projections, these are also sort of 10-year numbers. I just put the annualized growth rate in the top corner. This would be from April of 2022. So it's not projecting from essentially the bottom of the pandemic. But for total non-farm, pretty similar growth rate, a little bit, in this case, less than 2%. In this case, the model just says 0% growth for accommodation and food service, because I think there's so much volatility with that huge drop from the pandemic. Even though we've recovered and it's flattened out in places, I think the clear relatively flat trend from 2000 to 2010 into where we're at today is probably getting picked up here a lot, where it's not necessarily expecting an awful lot of growth. And where we have seen this growth coming out of the recession, that was largely on the food service side, not the accommodation side. Again, with construction, it's not seeing as large a recovery. You can see that we're basically where we were prior to the housing boom. And I think that is kind of dominating the automatic trends here. Healthcare and social assistance, I know the prior chief economist here used to joke that this was the best series in the world to forecast because you could just draw a line through it. Also looking at manufacturing, professional business services, a lot of these industries are either in that 2% growth range or the 0% growth range. But that's, I think, generally a pretty good blueprint for what we might expect. So if you're looking at employment growth on average of somewhere in that 1.8 to 2% growth range, I think that's a pretty good ballpark for what we might expect to see with employment heading out into the next biennium. And that is all the slides I have. I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt. Any questions from anybody or comments? I think it'll be interesting as we go into the forecast cycle. Obviously, these inputs play a major role in forecasting some of the revenue sources. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in this very unique, time with different pressures affecting employment. Thank you again for your time. We very much appreciate it.
Sorry, Chair Rosenthal, I did have one
Sure.
question. Going back to the selected long-term projections, David, that you had, and specifically, I noticed you picked one out called ambulatory healthcare services, and you show that growing at a lower rate than, the nursing and residential care. I would think that would follow that trend a little bit closer. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts as to why that's so low in that projection going out.
Not at the moment. I would probably have to talk to our analysts about that. I would guess that it's more dominated by population growth than the special demands for an aging population, because this is like your walk-in doctor clinic.
Got it. Okay, that was it. It stood out for me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So that concludes agenda item 7. Now we're going to get into some information sets that Mr. Ginden will walk us through to help set the stage for what's happened in the past and get us on a level playing field for what we're going to need to consider for the forecast going forward. So we'll skip to agenda item 8, which is a presentation on the tax changes that were approved by the legislature during the 2021 session, court decisions related to actions approved by the legislation during the 2019 session, and then the Economic Forum's May 4th, 2021 forecast for FY 21, 22, and 23 adjusted for some of those actions. So with that, I'll turn the floor back over to Mr. Ginden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Russell Ginden with the Fiscal Analysis Division, and I apologize for the rather lengthy agenda item, but that's what's necessary for us to comply with the open meeting law requirements for posting agendas. So I'm going to share my screen here and show the tables that are in the Economic Forum meeting packet for agenda item 8. But as you know, they get a little hard to see. So I will suggest that if possible, you try and follow along, maybe if you can, if you have another screen or not, with the tables that are in packet. And so this table begins for agenda item 8 on page 65 of the packet. And so for the 3 returning members, this is information under agenda item 8 that was actually brought forward and presented to the Economic Forum at their December 2021 meeting. But with 2 new members, we thought it would be beneficial to bring this set of information forward for the new members, but also to somewhat use it to set some of the stage for the meetings that will be occurring here in October, in November, and December. And so the tables that you're looking at here, this set of tables is, this is what's referred to as the Economic Forum's General Fund Revenue Forecast Table. So this is the set of tables and you can see the notes sometimes outnumber the actual number of tables with numbers. And so when the Economic Forum is conducting its business, as I went through, required to do the general fund unrestricted revenue forecast on or before December 3rd of the even numbered years, and then May of the odd numbered years, that this is the table that's prepared to document all the unrestricted general fund revenues for which the Economic Forum ends up approving a forecast. And so this is the Economic Forum's forecast for May 4th, 2021. But as Chair Rosenthal pointed out in reading the agenda item title, that it includes adjustments for legislative actions, and in this particular case, also for court decisions. And so I just wanted to pause here for a second for everyone, but especially the two new members, to explain what occurs to get to this set of tables. The Economic Forum is required to produce its forecast in December and May under current law. Obviously, the May forecast is occurring during the legislative session. Thus, the legislature can be considering making changes to the law that would impact any one or more of these unrestricted general fund revenue sources. Normally, none of that legislation is ended up being approved by the legislature and signed by the governor so that it has the effect of law before the forum has to prepare their forecast by that May 3rd deadline. Excuse me, May 1st deadline. So then what staff from the Fiscal Analysis Division does is attempts to go, if it's not an integral part of what's going on during session, where we may already be preparing estimates for it, and we may be preparing those estimates independently as staff to the legislature. But generally, we're working with our colleagues from the agency that would be administering the revenue source for which the law change would be occurring. And we also will work with our counterpart in the budget division in the Governor's Office of Finance in producing these estimates for, when possible, for the estimated impact of legislative changes to the law for these revenue sources. So then we have to get those estimates incorporated into the Economic Forum's May forecast that was done without consideration of these law changes. So that's what the elements are for with regards to the part of the agenda item is adjustments for actions approved by the legislature in the 2021 regular session. Also, I'll go through it a little bit more here when we get to that specific item in the tables, but we also had an impact to the modified business tax due to a court case and a Supreme Court ruling that came out towards the end of May during the 2021 session that then affected that revenue source. And thus we had to take account of that in the Economic Forum's report. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on going through all the revenue sources, but just wanted to get out that this is the table that documents all the general fund revenues that the Economic Forum is preparing forecasts for. And then later, when we get to an agenda item, I'll go through the role of the Technical Advisory Committee and in relation to the forum's direction to it for many of the revenue sources that are documented on this table. As you can see here, we have, and I'll try and scroll down then to the final page, that you can see at the bottom there that there's the total general fund revenues and after tax credits. And at this meeting, I don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time going through all the various tax credit programs because that's something I think that would be more appropriate to address at the fall meetings. But there have been various tax credit programs that began getting approved in the 2013 legislative session. And then others have been added in sessions since the 2013 with regards to tax credit programs that can affect one or more of the general fund revenue sources. Generally, that's the gaming percentage fee tax, the modified business tax, and the insurance premium tax are the ones that are principally affected by these tax credit programs. So we have to handle them in a different way. And so the decision was to sort of almost handle them as a negative revenue source in terms of the forecasting process versus trying to incorporate them into a net forecast for the revenue source that they're forecast, that they may affect. So at the bottom here, you can see that the forecast for FY21 for FY 2021 was approximately 4.2 billion. And you make, so right, the form is required to do the forecast for the current fiscal year, as I stated. So on May 21, they still have to do a forecast for FY21, the current fiscal year. And that forecast still matters because even though the legislature is in session in 2021 and considering doing forecasts for FY22 and 23 to do the forecast for that next biennial budget cycle, the forecast for any revisions to the FY21 forecast, the current biennium, still matter because the legislature and the governor can look at the change in the forecast for FY21 and decide how to allocate that revenue in terms of general fund revenue programs, or it can generally end up becoming part of the ending fund balance for FY21, which then is the beginning fund balance for FY22 and could be considered as revenue available to be used to provide general fund funding for programs for the FY22 and or the FY23 biennial budget. So I will point out here for the two new members that at the December 2021 meeting, staff prepares a set of tables that always compares the actual collections to the forecast. And so at the December 21 meeting, there was information provided on how the actual collections for FY21 compared to the forecast from December 2020, as well as May 21, and then also going back to 2 years prior, when the forecast would have been a forecast as the 2-year ahead forecast for FY21. And so all that information is available if you go to into Nellis for the Economic Forum. If you have interest, you'll see the information that's prepared on that forecast comparison. I did not think it was worth bringing all that forward here. And Madam Chair, it's worth, I think, stating at this point in time, since it went through my mind, is that clearly as staff to the members of the Economic Forum, if Mr. Crum and Mr. Zahn would like additional information or would like the opportunity for staff to go through any of that information or other information to that they feel that they would like to have in preparing for the fall meetings, they are welcome to contact staff and we can provide them the information or set up a meeting to go through that with them. So I just, since that went to my mind, wanted to offer it now. I will point out that the forecast of the 4.248 billion that you see here for FY21, the actual collections were approximately $226 million above that forecast, just to provide a little bit of reference point as when we go into the next agenda item and start comparing the FY22 actuals compared to forecast. So then you can see the forecast for FY 2022 was approximately 4.4 billion and then 4.7 billion here for FY23. And again, this is the forecast after the adjustments for legislative actions, of course. So then what I wanted to do here, and again, as I noted, the notes go on, but this is our attempt, and this is as much for us as staff, it is for members of the forum and or the public to try and document these legislative changes. Sorry, my computer was acting slow. So there are many other tables under this agenda item. And again, this is the information presented in the December 21 meeting being brought forward. And I don't plan to go through all these. This table 1, 2, and 3 are a set of tables that staff to the Economic Forum, as well as fiscal staff as staff to the Nevada Legislature, decided that we needed to create a set of tables to try and document these tax credits when they started getting approved by the legislature, to be able to handle how they statutorily work, but then how they work in the real world with regards to actually being taken and affecting the net amount of general fund revenue that is available to fund the state's budget. So table 1 is just simply the simple summary table to document the economic forum's May 4th, 2021 forecast as it existed under law at that point in time, as well as then itemizing out the tax credit. And so that's what table 1 is. And again, all these tables are actually prepared and provided in what's called the appropriations report, which is prepared by the Fiscal Analysis Division, and it's also available on the legislature's website. And it can be provided, though, independently to any of the members that would like to have that document. So table 2 is the table where we actually go through and attempt to document those legislative actions, and in this particular case, court decision that affects any of these general fund revenue sources, and then when possible, provide the estimate. So I'll just go through some of the major ones here, especially as they would have the potential for consideration by staff in the economic forum's duties going forward for the December forecast approval process. So what in the 2021 session, we had AB 495 that was approved. And again, I'm looking here on, I apologize, page 79 of the economic, or excuse me, of the meeting packet. So in AB 495, a new tax on businesses in the business of extracting gold and silver are required to pay a new tax on their mining gross revenue. And you can see the details of it here, that it's a tax that's due towards the end of the fiscal year based on the gross revenue for the immediately preceding calendar year. And so the tax is that it's 0.75% of the gross revenue in excess of 20 million. So the first 20 million is exempt from taxation. And then 1.1% on any calendar year gross revenue in excess of 150 million. The estimates for that, you can see here, are approximately 83.8 million for FY22 and $81 million for FY23. At this point in time, the Department of Taxation has reported no actual year-to-date collections. As a new tax, understanding from talking to taxation staff, they're still working to this tax and then getting it processed, and also working with the controller system on how to account for it based on the nature of this new tax and its mechanics. But we will obviously have information to report on this as the actual collections for FY22 compared to the forecast at the October meeting. What's worth pointing out for this tax, as well as the net proceeds of minerals tax, that's been an existing tax on the net proceeds of all mining, not just gold and silver, that under the provisions approved in AB 495 for this new mining gross revenue tax on gold and silver extraction, that the proceeds of this new tax belong to the general fund in FY22 and FY23 only. Beginning in FY24, they go to what is called the State Education Fund, which is the fund that's set up where all the revenue goes now under the new pupil-centered funding plan for funding K-12 education. So and then also for the net proceeds of minerals tax, the state's general fund portion, that tax will begin going to the State Education Fund beginning in FY24 also. So what that means for the Economic Forum and staff that will be preparing forecasts to bring forward to the Technical Advisory Committee in the Economic Forum is that we will have to prepare forecasts for FY23. And the forum will have to approve a forecast for FY23. But since the Economic Forum doesn't have any statutory requirement or responsibility to provide forecasts for the revenue sources that make up the State Education Fund, the Economic Forum will not be presented nor approving forecasts for FY24 and FY25 for this new tax, as well as the net proceeds of minerals tax. So I just wanted to put that out there in terms of one of the elements that will be being taken into account as the forum and staff move into the fall forecast cycle. On page 80 of the packet in table 2, you see the modified business tax, and with the listing here, and as the modified business tax as a general tax actually is comprised of 3 components. what we refer to as the modified business tax on non-financial businesses. It's sometimes referred to as general business, as well as then the modified business tax on financial institutions and the modified business tax on mining. The MBT on financial mining has the same structure in terms of the tax rates in relation to the structure and tax rates for the MBT on non-financial entities. To provide a little bit of the information here, in the 2015 session, when the commerce tax as a new tax was approved, there were also changes made to the modified business tax. And such that the rate was established at 1.475% on quarterly wages paid by an employer to their employees that exceeded $50,000 per quarter. And then the tax rate on the modified business tax on financial and mining institutions was set at 2%. But then there were provisions put in place as part of the new commerce tax being approved and the increase in the modified business tax rate, which we refer to as the MBT rate reduction calculation. And under the provisions established in the 2015 session, that the Department of Taxation on or before September 30th of even numbered years, they're supposed to go look at the actual collections for that immediately preceding even numbered fiscal year and look at the actual collections for the modified business tax, all three components, as well as the commerce tax, and then the branch bank excise tax. And I will point out is the branch bank excise tax is more just a result of the chapter reference for the structure of this MBT rate reduction calculation, but it's such a small revenue source, it doesn't really have any bearing in impacting the calculation. But I statutorily need to point out that it is a revenue element of the rate reduction calculation. So again, the Department of Taxation is supposed to go look at the actual collections compared to the forecast. So under the law in September 2018, for the reference period FY 2018, the taxation did the calculation. The calculation is if the actual collections for those revenue sources, including any applicable tax credits, if the actual collections come in more than 4% above the forecast, then taxation is required to do the statutory formula calculation to proportionally reduce the modified business tax rates such that they would have only generated 4% revenue over the forecast. So that calculation done by the Department of Taxation for September 2018 resulted in the MBT non-financial rate being required to be reduced from 1.475% to 1.378%, and the 2% rate tax on for the modified business tax and financial mining to be lowered from 2% to 1.853%. Under the provisions for the modified business tax rate reduction calculation, any rate reductions that are to occur don't become effective till July 1st of the next fiscal year. So thus, that meant these rate reductions were to become effective July 1st, 2019 for FY 2020, and then going forward in FY 21. Thus, in December 2020 and May 21, the Economic Forum as well as staff produced forecasts based on these lower rates. But during the 21 session, SB 551 was approved, which the practical effect was it eliminated the effect and got rid of the rate reduction calculation. Thus, it was the effect was to establish those higher rates of 1.475 for the modified business tax on non-financial and 2% on financial and mining entities. Thus, after the 2019 session, we had to go do a legislative adjustment to add that money back because the forum had forecast at the lower rates and add that back. The provisions of SB 551 were challenged in the courts, and the lower court, you can see in the note there, so I'll allow more people to just read it, that ruled that the provisions of SB 551 regarding the MBT were unconstitutional. And on May 13, 2021, the Supreme Court upheld the lower court's ruling. thus requiring a refund for the taxes paid at the higher rates, as well as then the lower rates became effective going forward. So the effect of the Supreme Court's ruling is that the Economic Forum in May 21 had done the forecast at the higher rates based on the 2019 session. But with the court decision occurring, then we had to go in and make the adjustments. Thus, working staff from the budget division of GFO and taxation and the fiscal analysis division worked to try and work through the effect of the court decision. The court decision effect was that taxpayers had paid at the higher rate for all 4 quarters of FY 2021, or excuse me, FY 2020, and the first 3 quarters of FY 2021, because taxation was able to effectuate the rate reduction for the last quarter of FY 2021. Thus, that meant MBT taxpayers who paid taxes at the higher rate for the 4 quarters of FY 2020 and the 3 quarters of FY 21 were entitled to refunds. And then the rate reduction became effective for the 4th quarter of FY 21 and then going forward. Thus, what you see here are the estimates that staff put together to attempt to estimate the effect for the refunds with including the interest on those refunds, and then the rate reduction and allocating those effects to FY 21, FY 22, and FY 2023. So again, under the current law based on the Supreme Court's ruling, that staff will be preparing forecasts right now under the lower rates. It's worth noting here, and then we will know by the October meeting, and we'll have work with Chair Rosenthal to have an agenda item to have taxation come in and present, because not only did the court decision say that the effects of SB 551 were unconstitutional, what it did is it reestablished the MBT rate reduction calculation provisions in law. Thus, the Department of Taxation will be required on or before September 30th, 2022, to look at the actual collections for FY 2022 compared to the forecast for the modified business tax, the commerce tax, and the branch excise tax. And again, if those actual collections are more than 4% over the forecast, they'll be required to do the proportional rate reduction. So I just thought it would be worth pointing out here that we may have a different set of rates under which the forecast will have to be prepared for FY 24 and FY 25 compared to FY 23, if there is a rate reduction requirement based on the actuals compared to forecast. But the good news is since that calculation is required to be done on before September 30th, we will know that information at the October meeting, and then it can be taken into account by the forecasters in the forecast that will be presented to the Economic Forum at the November and December meeting. So, Madam Chair, that was, I think, the information that I wanted to point out in these 2 tables, and you can see the estimated effects. It's worth pointing out that one of the other items that was approved by the legislature was, you can see at the top of the table 2 on page 81 of the meeting packet. It's under the short-term car lease category that SB 389 was passed, which is, you can see it references the regulation of licensing, but it's also the taxation of peer-to-peer car sharing programs. And for this, think Turo. And for those that aren't familiar, if you go to Turo.com, Turo, this is where private individuals can rent their own cars to entities by using the Turo website. And so the effect of SB 389 was to require the same 10% state general fund tax on the rental of short-term rental of vehicles by, say, short-term rental companies, so I think Hertz, Enterprise, Budget, those types of entities. There's a 10% tax on the price for the rental of the vehicle, as well as there's an additional 2% tax that's imposed in Clark and Washoe on the rental of a car. Those same taxes are now due on the rental price when a car is rented by a person on Turo. And so you can see the estimate is was about $750,000 because it came effective October 1st of FY 2022. I will point out here that it's going to be, forecasters will be taking this into account when they're doing their forecast. Most likely, staff will not be able to separately talk about this or display information for it to the members of the Economic Forum, because taxation cannot, because of the potential limited number of taxpayers, taxation can't disclose information publicly that would result in an individual taxpayers or allow someone to infer what an individual taxpayer's numbers may be if there's not enough taxpayers. So I just wanted to point out that this is a new thing that we'll be taking account when we're doing the short-term car rental forecast, but we may not be able to itemize out the actual effects of this legislation due to the nature of the tax and the number of taxpayers. And the Department of Taxation's requirement to not disclose any information about an individual taxpayer's taxes. So that's table 2. And table 3, again, what it does is it brings the results of table 1, which is, again, summarizing the economics forum forecast under current law, and then the results of table 2, which is any changes to the legislative actions, and again, in this case, court decisions. And it just summarizes at an aggregate level the total general fund, and then itemizes out the effect of the tax. And it's worth pointing out here that what the forecasters do based on the direction provided by the Economic Forum is we're preparing any revenue source that could be affected by tax credit programs. We prepare forecasts in gross terms. That is before the effect of any tax credits. And then that's what is presented to the Economic Forum, what the Economic Forum considers and ends up approving, because separate forecasts are approved for the tax credits and then they're netted off at the bottom of the table in the forecast world. Then as the actual world occurs, we get information from the Gaming Control Board and the Department of Taxation in terms of what was the net amount of revenue collected in terms of any tax credits that were taken. So then we can determine the gross amount to keep track of the gross and net effects on those revenue sources. But I think it's been a good decision by the Economic Forum, and when we get to a later agenda item, we'll discuss that. I think it's much easier to forecast these revenue sources in gross terms, and that way not trying to take into account the individual tax credits for those revenue sources by the individual forecasters. But I just thought that'd be worth pointing out here in terms of that's what tables 1, 2, or 3 are attempting to document the effect of that. So, sorry, I'm trying to get the thing to move through. Then what I won't spend a lot of time on, but it's our tables that were in the December meeting. And I don't know why my computer is so slow here, is beginning on page 93 of the meeting packet. These are, again, some additional pages out of the appropriations report that the Fiscal Analysis Division prepares to document the effects of the legislature's actions, both on the revenue and budget side from the 2021 session. So this was a table just to document the comparison between the Economic Forum's December 3rd, 2020 forecast under current law, and then the May 4th, 2021 forecast adjusted for legislative actions and court decisions. This is a way of documenting how much additional revenue was added between the forecast. And again, here, it's a much larger number than you would normally see because of the difficulty in forecasting during a pandemic. And I will just point out here, make it part of the information set, where there were 3 returning members. But as we were progressing through the December meeting and into the May meeting, not only did we have uncertainty about what was going on with COVID cases and the pandemic and the economic effects, where there's also uncertainty about when the vaccine may be rolled out. And also with regards to all the federal stimulus money that was being out there and when it may be rolled out. So just, I wanted to add that to the record here again, as to what was the information sets going on between the December 2020 and the May 21 forecast. And in terms of probably and then what actually started occurring in the real world shortly after the forum did its forecast. And in terms of the actual collections coming in, as I said, above the FY21 forecast. And so you can see that the forecast over the 3 years for the May 21 forecast compared to December was approximately $873.4 million in terms of an upward revision. And you can see that the forecast by the years yourself, looking at the table 1. And then on the next page, page 94, are some tables to attempt to, because of the order of magnitude of the changes, just because of the economy and what was starting to occur in terms of the forum's forecast and trying to take account of the stimulus and the vaccines and all that. And then you had the legislatively approved adjustments as well as the court decisions. So table 2 at the top of page 94 just documents those, itemizes out those effects in terms of by fiscal year, the changes in the May forecast compared to December forecast by those that were just purely due to the economic forum's change, due to change in forecast in terms of the outlook for things from the December to May, as well as those changes due to the legislative actions. And then you can see the court decisions and the legislatively approved and court decisions. Those are coming out of the table 2 that I previously went through. And again, you can see that the net effects there by fiscal year as well as in total. And then table 3 here was a table for as well as staff in the public to go in and document the results that you saw in table 2 and that are shown in the table 2 at the top of this page. The itemize out the effect of the court's decision regarding the modified business tax with regards to how much was due to refunds and interest for refunding the 7 quarters worth of taxes paid at the higher rate that based on the court decision should not have been. And then the effect of the rate reduction, and then those effects being allocated to FY 2021. And obviously it should be no surprise that the bulk of the refunds and interest is being allocated to FY 21, even though that refund is for FY 2020 and the 3 quarters of FY 21. Most of the refund was then allocated in FY 21, but because of it happened so close to the end of the fiscal year, when we were looking at this in terms of what taxation thought they'd be able to get, in a sense, out the door, there was some residual amount of the refunds and interest that we thought in the estimation world needed to be placed on the sheets for FY 2022 that you see here. And then the rest is allocating the 1 quarter of rate reduction in FY 21, and then 4 quarters of the rate reduction for FY 22 and FY 2023. And so then I just wanted to point out that the blacked out material here, there's nothing cryptic or secret there. It just, this text makes reference to tables that are actually in the appropriations report. So if you read this text, you would be thinking, where are the other tables? And so I just thought I should black it out in this public document. But if you're interested in what those tables are, is what are called the ending fund balance tables that are in the appropriations report. And then finally, I just, since this was included in the December meeting, I'm including it here. This is just the table that was put together for the members of the Economic Forum at the May meeting to be able to try and document the change in the May 21 forecast based on current law to the December forecast based on current law by basically the major general fund revenue sources that the Economic Forum forecast. And so with that, Madam Chair, that was sort of, I think, the information I wanted to get under this agenda item out to the members of the Economic Forum, and especially realize went through possibly a little more detail than the December meeting, just hopefully for the benefit of Mr. Crum and Mr. Zahn as new members, in terms of what the forum producing the tables that are at the beginning of this agenda item And then the attempt to document as we move from the December to May forecast cycle. And then also what happens after the forum prepares its forecast in May and staff having to come back and make adjustments. Now, the good thing is the economic forum proceeds here into the October, November, December forum forecast cycle. It will be, we won't have to worry about any legislative actions because the forecasters will get those incorporated into their forecast. But please note that as for those revenues that were impacted, we will be making sure we're documenting and noting that as the information is presented to the economic forum at their October, November, and December meetings in terms of any of those changes and what impact they may have in terms of the consideration being taken into account and the effect on the forecast. The only one that is out there is that we do not know yet, as I mentioned, is whether or not the MBT rate reduction calculations will actually trigger an additional MBT rate reduction, which will then be taken into account in the forecast that will be presented if such a rate reduction does occur. But again, that information will be available and presented to the forum at their October meeting. And with that, Madam Chair, I can answer any of the questions that the members may have under agenda item 8.
Thank you, Russell. If anybody has any questions, feel free.
I will take you up on the review ahead of our next meeting, and maybe Vince, you and I can coordinate that together so it doesn't have to do a repeat for both of us. But Russell, it would be great to go through more depth with you.
Excuse me?
Agreed.
I was just saying it would be helpful to go into in-depth review with you. And Vincent and I will try to coordinate our schedule so you only have to do it once.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Zahn, Mr. Crum. And so what we will do is, after this meeting, as your schedules permit, feel free to reach out to me, and then we can possibly work to send you some information in advance, and then meet to go through that with you to get you any of the information or human capital that you feel that you would like in advance of the October meeting. And so, Madam Chair, we will just work with Mr. Zahn and Mr. Crum to effectuate that as your staff. So,
Great. I'm glad to hear they'd like more information and that they're not turning in their resignation after all that.
Not at all. Not at all. It's great information. There's a lot, though.
The staff does a great job of keeping us in line and keeping the charts and the tables lined up so that we're clear, because there are a lot of numbers and a lot of changes to numbers and a lot of moving parts. But I think you'll see as we go through the process, it actually is pretty logical and straightforward. There's just a lot of detail. Any other questions from any other forum members for Russell on this agenda item? I can't see anybody because I just see Russell's screen, but I'll take that as everybody's good. Great. Okay, so then next on the agenda is a report and discussion of the actual year-to-date fiscal year 2022 collections compared to the May 4th, 2021 forecast by the forum. Again, adjusted for the legislative actions and court decisions that impacted those forecasts. So I will turn it back over to Mr. Gindin to walk us through this item.
thank you, Madam Chair. And it looks like, did I just lose my share screen or not here?
Yes, you are not sharing the screen on my screen.
Yeah,
There you
so can everyone see the screen again? And it's just a white screen, so you're not going, well, I see it, but I don't see anything. So,
Yes.
so under agenda item 9, this is for the 3 returning members. And this begins on page 97 of the meeting packet. Again, I would agree with Chair Rosenthal that this is a lot of information and it may seem overwhelming at times, even to staff. But this was our attempt to document a complex process. And I agree with Chair Rosenthal that it all works out as we go through it. Just at any particular point in time, someone may question that. So these tables are the tables that were put together by staff to the Economic Forum to track the actual forecast for a fiscal year compared to the forecast. Now, as you saw in the tables that I had presented, those are just fiscal year forecasts. And that's what the economic forum ends up approving, is a fiscal year forecast for each revenue source. Obviously, these revenue sources are either monthly, quarterly, or some are even annual, meaning they come in once a year in terms of the tax payment. So that creates a uniqueness then in terms of trying to develop a methodology or tracking the actual year-to-date collections that are reported by the various agencies responsible for administering these revenue sources and in relation to a fiscal year forecast. Also, the tax credits add another element of complexity to it. So, Madam Chair, I'll go to these. I'm not going to go through all these tables in intimate detail, but we'll probably go to just a little bit more here for the benefit of members Chrome and Zahn.
Sure.
Table 1 here that you see on the screen it's on the left-hand side, you can see we're blocking out by this category called major general fund revenue sources. And then we have this non-major general fund revenue sources, and then all other, and then the tax credits, as you sort of work from top to bottom on the left-hand side. It's worth pointing out here, and we'll discuss it more in a later agenda item, but this is the vernacular that we use, is these major general fund revenue sources. These 7 revenue sources that you see listed here, with the modified business tax being comprised of its 3 elements, and then the live entertainment tax being comprised of 2 elements, but those make up the 7 major general fund revenue sources that the economic forum at its, as it works to get to the December even numbered year forecast and the May odd year, this is where forecasters actually present their individual forecast to the economic forums in the public meetings, and then the economic forum decides on a consensus forecast in the public meeting for these 7 revenue sources. All the other ones are handled by the Technical Advisory Committee based on the direction of the economic forum to the TAC, and I'll leave it there and we'll go to that more in another agenda item. But just wanted to at least get that out there, why you're seeing this distinction between trying to call a major and a non-major in terms of, well, it's the functional way that the economic forum has decided to handle its statutory duties to forecast all of the state's unrestricted general fund revenues. So having said,
Mr. Ginden?
Yeah.
Sorry, could I interrupt you 1 second right there? I just wanted to make it very clear to especially the new members that what you see presented here is how the economic forum has split these revenues, has them split currently. There is absolutely an option for us to move taxes within categories. If we wanted something that is currently a non-major fund source to be moved up to a major general fund source, we can do that. So just keep in mind that this is somewhat flexible. From time to time, there could be a tax that has certain growth characteristics or certain interests that we might want to pay, get information on in a bit more detail. So just wanted to point out that flexibility we have in categorizing these taxes.
thank you, Madam Chair, for bringing that up, because that actually helps me in terms of as we will migrate to when we get to agenda item 12, where we'll have more of a discussion. So you making that comment now actually helps facilitate the segue when we get to that item. So what you see on this table in the yellow highlight, and I realize this looks a little like sherbet ice cream in these tables, but there was more thinking that possibly went into these tables than one would like to admit in terms of how do you design these tables to do the tasks that they're doing, but also make it so that you can present them publicly, as well as we provide them to members of the legislature. So in the yellow, you see the FY 2021 actual collections for each revenue source. And then again, the all other, but it's all the revenue sources listed in this table. So what you see here is the actual percent change. And then in the column to the right of that, that was the forum's forecast percent change for the May forecast. and that would have been when their forecast, they would have known the FY 2020 actual, but they were forecasting what FY 21 would be. So specifically here, I'm just going to use the sales tax as the revenue source is to go through. So you can see in the economic forum's May 2021 forecast, as we were trying to figure out things during the pandemic, that they were projecting that the state's 2% sales tax collections would grow 2.3% compared to what the FY 2020 actual. The actual collections for FY 21, you can see, grew 9.1%. Compared to the forecast 2.3% growth rate. And that ended up being approximately about an $83.3 million forecast error for FY21 for the state 2%. And it's worth pointing out here, just since I'm using the sales tax, that this sales use tax line item here is what's called the state's general fund portion of this, the sales tax rates that are imposed in each county. And that's only 2%. Right, there's depending on the county that you're in, your rate can range from 6.85% to, I believe it's 8.365% or something like that in Clark. And so, but of that sales tax rate, only 2% belongs to the state general fund. The other rates are either going to provide funding from the sales tax for K-12 education, or it's revenue for local governments, or for special purposes. And I don't intend to go through that, but again, if any of the members do have questions, we can go through that. So then in the orange portion of the table, you see the economic forum's forecast for FY 2022 from their May 1st, 2021. And again, any of these revenue sources would include the adjustments for legislative actions or court decisions. The sales tax, fortunately, did not have any adjustments to it. So again, you see the economic forums here in the middle orange column. This was the forum's forecast in May 21, comparing their FY 2022 forecast to their FY 21 forecast. So they were forecasting a 4.8% growth of the FY 2022 2% sales tax collections compared to their FY 21 forecast. But now, because we know the FY 21 actual, the actual collections can actually decline 1.8% and still achieve the FY 2022 forecast, because the FY 21 came in so much above, the actual collections came in so much above the FY 21 forecast. So that's what this first table is showing you. And then in the green, we're just showing you the shares of the total general fund. So you just have an idea of the order of magnitude. And I will be honest that the shares throughout the fiscal year can get a little goofy because of the timing of when the various monthly, quarterly, or annual taxes come in. So it's really more important when you look at the shares of the FY21 actual compared to a forecast, especially in a pandemic period. But so keep in mind this 1.8% decline as a number that you're going to see roll forward in the next table. So that's what table 1 is doing, is showing you the FY21 actual, the FY 2022 forecast, and then what was the original projected forecast rate versus what is it now for FY22, given that we now know the FY21 actual, and that tells you how much you have to grow, or in some cases actually decline, to still achieve the forecast. So with that, then going into table 2 on the next page, on page 98 of the packet. So FY21 is showing you the FY21 actual year to date. And then the orange is showing you the FY22 actual year to date. And so what you'll see here is on the left-hand side, again, it's the same block as table 1, but in the parentheses after the description of the tax, it's telling you the number of actual months of collections known. So when you look at this, sales tax is a monthly tax. So here through the end of May, which is our information set ending date, there are 9 months of actual collections for the sales tax known and reported by the Department of Taxation. Whereas you can see right below that, the percentage fees, we actually know 11 months. We know through the end of May, because we're a July through June fiscal year stay. So our fiscal year from a tax period, 12-month tax period ends June. So we know through March for the sales tax, but through May for percentage, because that's important to keep in mind when you're trying to do this actual compared to forecast year-to-date comparison. So as I stated, the form forecasts a fiscal year. So we know here again for the sales tax, the actual collections year-to-date to the first 9 months for FY21 to the first 9 months of FY 2022. And you can see those amounts, and then you can see the percent change. I would challenge anybody in May 2021 that would have been forecasting 26% growth and 2% sales tax. But that's the actual percent change. Well, so then the methodology that the Fiscal Analysis Division uses to impute what the actual fiscal year to date forecast amount is for each revenue source, because there are numerous algorithms that could be used. What the Fiscal Division does is sort of treats it like an interest rate calculation. So you can see here in this second green column, and I'm trying to highlight with the hand, we actually say, well, okay, you saw from table 1, we can decline 1.8% to hit the FY 2022's forecast, given that we know the FY 21 actual. So take that minus 1.8% and multiply it by, take that 1.8% decline growth rate and multiply it by the FY 21 actual year-to-date amount to get the imputed forecast year-to-date amount. That's the mathematic that's going on for every revenue source. That's why you see the growth rates here in the second green column matching those that are in the column in table 1. So then once you do that, you can then go out here in the second from the right-hand column in the green block of data and say, well, actual year-to-date FY 2022, it's approximately 1.18 billion for the state 2% sales tax, but the estimated year-to-date forecast would be only 923.8 million. Thus, year-to-date through the first 9 months, we're estimating that we're approximately $260.7 million above the forecast year-to-date through the first 9 months for the state 2% sales tax. That's how you're reading this table. So then that's, again, you can go to the other ones. You can see for the insurance premium and modified business tax, they're quarterly. And so we now have 3 quarters of information. And so in the December meeting, we only knew 5 or 6 months of the monthlies and 1 quarter of the quarterlies. So you can see here in the June meeting, we have a much more substantial information set for the FY 2022 actual year to date. In fact, you can see that it's approximately, this orange column here is, what is this? We possibly know somewhere maybe around 90% of the year. But again, that metric gets a little difficult because of the nature of the taxes, especially in a pandemic. But so I'm not going to go through all the revenue sources other than you can see for those total majors, the 7 revenue sources that the Economic Forum individually considers and does forecast for at their public meeting. We're approximately $689.6 million above the forecast year to date, given anywhere from 9 to 11 months for the monthly revenue sources and the first 3 quarters for the quarterly revenue sources. Then going down, we just block out some of the larger, what we call non-major revenue sources. That the forum is directed to TAC produce a forecast, which is then brought forward to the Economic Forum. And we just break those out so we can keep track of those. And again, you can see those are approximately $69.4 million above the forecast. Again, not, anywhere from 9 to 10 months or 3 quarters of the revenue source, depending on whether it's monthly or quarterly. And then we have the all other, which is, you can see it's sort of the de minimis part compared to the majors. but it's approximately $39.2 million above the forecast. And so you can see in this table, and this is, I should note that the tables 1 and 2 are doing it on gross terms. That is before letting the tax credits that would hit an individual revenue source being taken into account. So this is in gross terms, which is how the economic forum and the forecasters forecast these revenue sources. That you can see down here in the bottom right hand. So based on the actual collections that are known through the period ending May 2022. So again, that would be 9 to 11 months of the monthly revenue sources, the first 3 quarters or quarterly revenue sources. And then we don't have any information on some of the annual taxes that are yet to come in by the for fiscal year 2022. Based on the methodology that we use for imputing a fiscal year forecast into its monthly or quarterly counterpart, we're approximately $798.1 million above the forecast. So I know that's a relatively large number in terms of, especially when you look at the forecast being somewhere around $4.5 billion. Probably I would have to say, looking ahead at what we know is possibly going to happen with some of the revenue sources, this will be a larger number by the time we complete FY 2022 and bring those results forward to the Economic Forum at their October meeting. I don't know how much bigger, but just looking at the revenue sources and what we're currently seeing in the monthly or quarterly behavior and the things that we know are going to occur, that this approximately around $800 million number will probably be a larger number by the time we complete FY 2022 and report those numbers. And then table 3 on the next, it's a table that just shows how much left is there in FY 21 that was collected actually in FY 21, given what we know year to date compared to the total fiscal year. And then the orange is just showing you what's left to be collected. And so you can see for the sales tax to hit the forecast, we only have to collect about $117 million. And so not much in terms of being able to hit the forecast. So clearly, I think you can see that the amount of the actual collections coming in for the forecast for the state 2% sales tax could that actual forecast amount could continue to increase. It is worth pointing out though, right? We're waiting for April, May, June of 2022 compared to the same period a year ago in 2021. Well, recall that's when we started setting sort of the records for gaming and sales tax, which is that March, April, May 21 period. So at least the year-over-year comparisons are going to get a little bit more difficult for both the sales tax and the gaming percentage fee tax, as well as some of the other revenue sources, because we're just going to finally start to annualize on a little bit more apples to apples comparison. It still may be Granny Smith compared to Macintoshes, but at least we may start to get within the same fruit category. And so then I won't spend a lot of time going through tables 4, 5, and 6. They're just doing the same thing as tables 1, 2, and 3. They're only doing it net after the credits. So just here on table 4, you can see the blue at the bottom for some of the tax credits. They're getting reported for the revenue sources that they're being taken against. And again, in this fall, we'll be going more to the tax credit programs and how they work in the forecast. And I won't do that here. But you can see our tax credits are really only allowed either, the tax credit can be taken against one or more of the 3 revenue sources, gaming percentage fee tax, insurance premium tax, or the modified business tax, or some of the tax credits can only specifically be taken against the insurance premium tax or the modified. And so again, you'll see in table 5 here, sorry, that you end up in the same place here at the bottom of the lower right-hand corner of table 5. It's the same $798.1 million actual forecast difference. And that's what has to mathematically occur as you work through reporting things in gross terms before the application of tax credits to the individual revenue sources versus reporting the revenue net terms after the application of tax credits. You end up standing at the bottom line of your ledger in the same place. It's just how you report the individual elements to which tax credits can affect those revenue sources. And so, Madam Chair, that was really the information that wanted to on tables 1 through 6. And it, excuse me, sorry, I'm having a hard time getting my screen. So table 6, that's at the back. That is, I will not go to that, but that is a table that we decided to prepare. It really is more for staff, but it is publicly available as necessary to answer questions as needed as we're going through the forum forecast process, or when members of the public or the legislature have questions. But that's where we're actually accounting for all the different tax credit programs and the revenue sources that they can hit in terms of, again, the FY21 actual, the FY21 actual year to date, the FY22 actual year to date, and then the FY2022 forecast. But those are really, there are even more detailed tables than the ones we just went through, but there are a way of attempting to publicly account for these tax credits and then have a way to answer questions if needed by anyone in terms of keeping track of the tax credits as they occur in relation to the forecast that's done. And so that does conclude the information that I wanted to present under agenda item 9 and can answer any questions that the members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Ginden. So I'll pause in case anybody has any questions they want to ask Russell on this item.
Let me just, I don't know if I've really got a question. You know, Russ, it's kind of interesting to see what's happened here. You know, we've got so many factors that we're seeing built into all of this. You know, first of all, we had stimulus payments in the early part, which I suppose got spent. We've got the pandemic going through and then diminishing. We've got entered into a period of really high inflation, which obviously has effects on particularly things like sales tax and such, you know that. Now the question is as to, not so much as to what's happened, but as how much do all of these things have an effect on future forecasts, which is what our, you know, what our job's going to be. Is inflation going to continue? Is it going to get worse? What effect is the change in the general economy that David was talking about earlier, you know, where we see some changes from different industries, etc. What does that affect? Anyway, it just seems to me that our job's not going to be particularly easy this next time, given particularly the fact that we see some economists calling for a recession in the next little while. So you take all of those in combination, I think that makes for an interesting fall for us.
Yeah, I would agree completely. It is a bit shocking to see the magnitude of the differences. Historically, you know, this body has a actually pretty exceptional, relatively low forecast error, but obviously we were dealing with such uncertainty just given the time period when we set these forecasts. And I think you're right, Mr. Levitt. I don't think our job's really going to be that much easier come this fall, but I guess the good news is at least the forecast error is, you know, to the upside versus to the downside.
Oh, Russ, where do we stand? You know, where do we stand on the replenishment of the rainy day fund now, given what we see on the numbers?
Sorry, I'm unmuted, sorry. Let me just quickly pull up the amount. So as of today, based on the statutory transfers that are required to occur, and I'll just go through those quickly since Mr. Levitt asked a question, that it's referred to as the rainy day fund. or statutorily, it's the stabilization account for the state general fund. And so under the law, that of the economics forum forecast for each fiscal year, the controller is required to withhold 1% of that forecast and place that amount in the rainy day fund. So when you look at your forecast that you're doing net after the tax credits, then the controller is required to transfer an amount equal to 1% of that to the rainy day fund. So then that transfer has been occurring, as well as under the additional statutory provisions relating to the rainy day fund. When the actual ending fund balance for a fiscal year is done and known, 40% of any amount over a 7% ending fund balance is required to be transferred to the rainy day fund. So obviously, because of forecasting in a pandemic is difficult, and as Chair Rosenthal has indicated, FY 2021, the actual came in above forecast. Clearly, the FY 22 actual will come in above forecast. So then we've had some pretty decent transfers under that 40% over 7% is sort of how we refer to it. So having said all that, as of today, we have a state rainy day fund balance of approximately $437.6 million.
And Russell, what was it right when we went into the pandemic? Was it 500 million or?
No, I think it might just been a couple hundred million, 300 million. Sorry, let me. That's where my mind is going, is how much it was, Madam Chair, in terms of how much was there.
So in any case, your guess is that we've more than replenished the rainy day fund that was depleted during the pandemic.
Yeah, and if not true, it most likely will be true, because 40% of anything over 7% for the FY 2022 ending fund balance will be required to be transferred to the rainy day fund. So for the mathematical ease of the example, let's say we finish here, the general fund revenues finish $800 million above the forecast, and all of that is over 7%, and that would be an additional $320 million transfer to the state's fund, just to give you some idea of the potential order of magnitude. Thus, that would take you over $700 million in the rainy day fund balance. But as Mr. Levitt pointed out, and possibly having a large amount in the state's rainy day fund balance, given that there's still some uncertainty in the economy, with the Federal Reserve trying to execute a soft landing again. But I think what I would conclude also is what the members are concluding is that could the December 2022, May 23 forecast cycle for the Economic Forum be as interesting and or difficult as the December 2020, May 21? Yes, for different reasons potentially, but it ain't easy forecasting going into, coming out of, or out of a pandemic, and then what occurs. And also, Madam Chair, I'll just point out here that, we can talk more on the agenda items, that what we had at the December meeting didn't have here is a discussion about the stimulus funds and what was going on with those in terms of the various different federal stimulus revenue streams that the state got and what's going on with them and getting them out in the economy. I just didn't think as staff it made a lot of sense to have that on the agenda for this June meeting, but I will work with you as the chair, because it probably would make sense to have an update on that in the October and or November meetings to help the forecasters as well as the members of the forum try and see what information we can shine on some of these things that possibly need to be taken into consideration as the forecasters and the members of the Economic Forum are trying to think about forecasting for the remainder of FY23 and then all of FY24 and FY25. But I would agree, the information set may be no easier to figure out than the last one. Yes.
Any other questions for Mr. Ginden on agenda item 9 from anybody? Okay. So then I'll move forward with agenda item 10, which is a presentation of the historical taxable sales, gaming market, and commercial tax statistics. So once again, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Ginden to walk us through that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for the record, Russell Ginden with the Fiscal Analysis Division. And what I'm trying to do is bring up a screen. I again will not spend a lot of time going through all the information that is compiled for this agenda item. So what I just wanted to share here for the members of this body, as well as the public, that what I'm sharing here, whoops, doesn't look like the share. Can you see the website?
We do.
Okay, sorry, on my screen it's not acting like it is, but as long as you can see. So I just wanted to bring up, and again, this is old information for the 3 returning members, but for the Mr. Chrome and Mr. Zahn as new members, that this actually, just so you know, a lot of these charts and tables came out of members of the Economic Forum directing staff to start putting together some charts and tables. It actually started as the forum was going through the Great Recession, for those of us that had to go through that, with me, I being one of them, and then going into the pandemic. So I'm starting to think it's piling on with regards to being a forecaster, having to go through a Great Recession and a pandemic. But what I just wanted to point out is here you can see under the Nellis page in the Legislative Council Bureau's website, all the charts and tables that are compiled for the gaming market statistics that the Nevada Gaming Control Board puts out publicly. And then we're just charting a lot of them. So some of the charts are on a monthly basis, but the gaming stuff is really pretty noisy on a monthly basis. So then we roll some of the stuff to quarterly to smooth out some of the noise from month to month, and maybe look at some of the trends. But also then we have a lot of charts on the taxable sales by county on a monthly basis, as well as the taxable sales for the state, Clark and Washoe, for some of the major, what are called the NAICS categories, the North American Industrial Classification System codes that the Department of Taxation reports that data for. And then we have the information on the commerce tax. So all the gaming charts and taxable sales charts have been updated to the latest month of information that's been reported by the Gaming Control Board or the Department of Taxation. The commerce tax stuff is the same information set that was prepared and made available to the Economic Forum at their December meeting, because it's a fiscal year tax. And so we will update these tables for the October meeting when we know the actual for FY 2022 and update that information set. But we wanted to bring those forward for they were part of the June 2022's information set, and possibly make it easier for all the members to have this available to them. I would suggest that, you know, if your schedules permit, to look at some of these, and then obviously as we update them for the October meeting, maybe we might have to spend some time trying to look at them to try and discern what's been happening for some of this, because I'll be honest, I don't have it figured out. Because when I look at the numbers that the Gaming Control Board has been reporting, and especially when you go look at those, we're telling you the number of devices in terms of slot machines and game and table devices. Well, clearly we went down to 0 at the heart of the pandemic, and then they've been coming back online. But they're still way below the number of devices and that were there pre-pandemic. But the amount of win being generated from them is, right, we keep hearing that we're in the $1 billion range, total gaming win categories. And then to see the comeback on the slot side, it's been a very interesting thing for a person who's been in the state since 1994 and sort of having to monitor or forecast gaming and seeing the transition from slot to game side. And now you see sort of the swing back in the pandemic. And then what will be happening as we continue to recover out of the pandemic, and the gaming market is going to be able to continue to bring back sort of more of the international market. And those people who play heavily on the table games side versus the slot side of that market. But just when you look at those, I have to keep, as most of you know, Mike Lawton is the staff person at the Gaming Control Board. So he's the one that provides me the information for the gaming charts, and I update those. And I send them back to him and say, can you look at these? Because I keep thinking I got the numbers in the wrong slots when I'm updating the charts. Because when you plot them and look at them, you're going, wow, that you go look at the peak levels that we're now generating, they're trumping the stuff we saw the peak pre-Great Recession, right? And so we were worried about, as we went through the Great Recession, and well, we hadn't recovered in gaming. And so then now we had a pandemic, but coming out of the pandemic and arguing that we're still not fully out of it in terms of an economy, we're generating pre-Great Recession levels of win. I'm just going to be honest with you as an economist and say, that's a very interesting phenomenon, right? It's real numbers. Just, I think if I would have forecast that to this body back in May 21, you might have had me removed from the room and locked up, right? In terms of what we've been seeing actually going on. And the same thing in the taxable sales side. Go look at those charts by county. Some of the counties, you would have to be told when and where the pandemic really occurred to go blow up the chart and see that there was any downturn, right? They just, in terms of looking at some of the taxable sales, total taxable sales by county on a monthly basis. Now, part of that, I think, is we passed a bill in the 2019 session called the Marketplace Facilitator Bill, which expanded our ability to have the sales tax attached to online sales. And what did the pandemic do? It pushed us more into online purchases. So you can look at some of those and make sense of some of the numbers and the categories. But again, even the taxable sales stuff for some of the counties is a little hard to go. But again, those were the comments that I wanted to make. We will be updating these and bringing them, the updated set forward to the October meeting. And as necessary, they'll be available if there are questions that the charts or tables can be used to address questions by the members of the Economic Forum, and or the use can be made of them as by any of the forecasters in trying to present information to the forum for consideration as to what's been going on and where they think things may be going as we progress through the October, November, December meetings. And with that, Madam Chair, those are the comments that I wanted to make, and I just wanted to show here on the screen where they are and that they're available. And also, if any of the members are having difficulty being able to get them or off of the website, please let us know. We can also email them out to you as the individual PDF files so that you would have access to those and not have to try and retrieve them through the website. And with that, those are the comments that I wanted to make for agenda item 10, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. So then we have some more administrative items just to cover in the remaining agenda items. So agenda item 11, a discussion of the report that the Economic Forum presents to the Interim Finance Committee. What's the date of that meeting?
Yes, Madam Chair, just under this agenda item, under the provisions that were put in place statutorily for these interim meetings, that is the June even numbered years and the December odd years, the chair of the Economic Forum and or they can direct their staff is required to make a presentation to the what's called the Interim Finance Committee, which is the body that administers the state's budget in the interim between sessions. And so the next meeting for the Economic Forum is scheduled for Tuesday, June 21st. So, Madam Chair, I can work with you in your schedule as to your availability on Tuesday, June 21st after the meeting's done. And then if your schedule permits, I will work with you as staff in terms of getting ready for that presentation. Generally, what the report is we report that the forum had the meeting, what the presentations are, sort of an overview, in a very high level, what was done. But then we will provide these the Sherbert tables of showing the actual collections compared to forecasts, so the IFC members can also have an idea of how the actuals are comparing to the forecast. But a lot of the other informational items that is not in any detailed way presented. But again, that is this agenda item. And so it's just a statutory requirement. And so, Madam Chair, if your schedule permits, we can work after the meeting to work on your portion of the presentation. And then lots of times the chair will turn it over to staff to also complete part of the presentation to the forum. And if your schedule does not permit making the presentation to the IFC on June 21st, you can then just direct me as staff to make that statutorily required presentation. And then I can try and work with my colleagues in the fiscal division who are staff to the ISC in relation to your schedule to see if we can make any accommodations for taking you earlier or later in the agenda item to accommodate your schedule. The June meeting is generally a pretty heavy agenda because, right, it's the last meeting before sort of close to the end of the fiscal year. But again, that was the information, and I can just work with you after this meeting, if that's okay with you for this agenda item.
Great, that works just fine. So then agenda item 12 is next, instructions to the TAC concerning the general fund revenue forecasts.
Yes, Madam Chair, again, for the record, Russell Gannon, Fiscal Analysis Division. As this one, we've sort of bounced around it a little bit as we've discussed the different agenda items. And then obviously, as Chair Rosenthal mentioned previously, that again, the forecast process is, you saw the table with the economic forms forecast table with all those revenue sources. And if you take a moment to look at them, a lot of them are somewhat de minimis, especially compared to what we call the major ones, the 7 big ones. So there's the Technical Advisory Committee, which supports the Economic Forum. So for what has historically been done is the Economic Forum decides which revenue sources it wants to have forecasts prepared and presented to it at their meetings versus then all the other general fund revenue sources that are not on the list that they decided that they want to have specific consideration given to them in terms of forecast presented, and then they'll look through those and decide a consensus forecast. The forum then directs the Technical Advisory Committee to prepare a consensus forecast for all the other general fund revenue sources for each of the 3 years. And then the Technical Advisory Committee does that, and they meet then before the forum's meetings to develop that forecast. And then that forecast is brought forward to the Economic Forum and presented to them in their public meeting and for their consideration. And then the forum will they can make changes if they want to any of those forecasts that were developed by the Technical Advisory Committee for any of the revenue sources that the TAC was directed to produce a forecast for. Or generally what happens is the staff will go through at a high level, especially for the non-majors, what those forecasts were by the TAC. And then the forum would have a motion and a second to approve the Technical Advisory Committee's forecast that the TAC approved at their meeting. And again, the TAC is a public body, and so all their meetings are done as a public body with posting agendas and the information being presented, and the public can attend or participate if they would like. It's worth pointing out that for probably the 2 new members. So when I say the forecasters, well, the forecasters for pretty much all these revenue sources are the agency that's responsible for collecting and administering the tax. So that's one of the forecasters. The other forecasters for all the revenue sources is the economists from the budget division of the governor's finance office, and then staff from the fiscal analysis division. myself being one of them, as well as my colleagues in the fiscal division. So that's for all the general fund revenues, whether they be majors that the forum wants to specifically consider, or all the other revenues that are as non-majors that the technical advisor can. So I just wanted to let, especially the two new members, that's sort of the process, that the forecasters are the same. And also the staff is the same, as I said, to the TAC and the forum, it's staff from the fiscal division, as well as the budget office. So then for the sales tax and gaming percentage fee tax, and this is a little bit of setting up the next agenda item, is we have Moody's Analytics under contract, prepares forecasts for the sales and gaming revenue sources as the state's two largest general fund revenue sources. And their forecasts are also presented to the Economic Forum for consideration, along with the forecast prepared by the agency, the budget division, and the fiscal division. As well as Moody's actually presents their economic outlooks too. It's just a little bit of setup for the next agenda item. So, Madam Chair, that's then sort of the information set. So under this agenda item would be the technical advisory, the economic forum here, through a motion and second, can say which are the major revenue sources that they want to consider going forward into the October, November, December forecast cycle. And then obviously the rest will be done by the TAC. And it's worth pointing out here that making a decision today does not obligate the forum such that you can't make changes at the October and even for the November meeting. It becomes much harder to start switching things around as we head into that December meeting. But I just also want to make sure everyone has that information set that, but this just starts to help staff know where the dynamics are for how to proceed heading into October, and which ones will be majors, which ones will be non-majors, because while we're working with the chair here over the next few months to start planning for the October, November meetings, we'll also be working with members of the Technical Advisory Committee to be able to have those meetings enough in advance of the forum meeting so that their business can be conducted and those forecasts brought forward. And so hopefully that provided enough information to the returning as well as the new members as what this agenda item is. And again, it's up to the forum to do. I will point out that you can see the major ones clearly are the sales tax, gaming percentage tax, insurance premium tax, modified business tax. The commerce tax is growing in its magnitude. The live entertainment tax and the real property transfer tax are a little less in order of magnitude, especially the LET. But I think the LET is the interesting one because we really didn't know how that market was going to shake out in December and May of 2020 and 2021. And clearly it's doing much better than what we would have thought. So even though it's a smaller one, it will be the forum's decision of whether to leave it as a major or non-major. But it is one that I wouldn't go look at the 21 actual and go, wow, that's really a small revenue source. If you go look, it used to be in the $100 million range before the pandemic. And then clearly the real property transfer tax, I think, is being a major, it's much more dynamically tied into sort of what's going on in the economy. Not that some of the other non-majors, but when you look at the other non-majors that are down there in that second block, again, the forum can pull any of those up that they'd like to, but also just so the forum's clear, they can leave the TAC to do it, but just also direct staff to make sure when they're bringing forward to the fall meetings to specifically provide information on any one of those ones that they don't want to individually consider themselves at their meetings, i.e. that is the economic forum. They still want the TAC to do it, but they want to make sure that the staff is going to present information on those revenue items that the TAC forecast at the forum meeting. So that's just sort of in between the two endpoints. It's a major or non-major, or it's a non-major, but the forum wants to make sure that it's specifically addressed under the agenda items for the non-majors at the forum meeting. So, and with that, Madam Chair, I will leave that. If there's any questions that the members may have, But under this agenda item, what staff is sort of really looking at is direction from the forum. And generally, it would be in the form of a motion and a second and approval by the body to provide this direction to staff. And again, at this point in time, knowing that changes could be made at the October, November meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Ginden. So at this time, I guess we'll entertain any questions, comments, or a motion on the direction to the TAC for the non-major revenue fund sources for them to forecast for us.
It seems to me that the mix that we currently have is probably just about right. I don't see any need to make a change in that unless somebody else sees something that I'm missing. Given that, I'll make a motion that we leave the mix between the major and minors considered by the forum and the TAC the same as it has been done in the past.
Second that.
Great.
What's the second?
That's Chrome. Sorry, Michael Chrome.
Okay, thank you.
So Russell, do you want to do a roll call vote?
Chair, just let me get my little tally thing that I'm keeping here on my computer so that I've got a record myself and don't have to try and remember afterwards. So again, just for the record, under agenda item 12 here, we have a motion and a second that the major general fund revenue sources that the forum will consider are the sales and use tax, the percentage fee tax, the insurance premium tax, the total modified business tax, all three pieces of that, the live entertainment tax, that is the gaming and non-gaming portions of that tax, the real property transfer tax, and the commerce tax. And thus, really, the effect of this motion means that then you're directing the technical advisory committee to prepare forecasts for all the other remaining general fund revenue sources. It was just easier to say what the majors are and then say everything else that you're directing the technical advisory committee to prepare forecasts for. So that is the motion. And so I will start with the roll call vote. Mr. Chrome?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Levitt?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Zahn?
Aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair Lewis?
Not here.
Nope. Okay. So Chair Rosenthal?
Aye.
And please let the record show for the vote on that agenda item that Vice Chair Lewis was not in attendance in the meeting and absent excused.
Thank you, Mr. Ginden. That leads us to agenda item 13, which is, as Russell alluded to, the discussion about whether or not to employ the services of Moody's Analytics to provide forecasts to us in our upcoming fall meetings. I personally feel like this is always an added benefit. And I think particularly in light of the uncertainty about the future, inflation, recession, all of those things coming, having the additional insight and commentary from an outside third party, both on Nevada economics as well as the US economics, would be very helpful. So I would be in favor of asking Moody's to come present, but I would like to hear discussion from other members of the forum.
Is the question here whether we use a third party or whether we use Moody's as a third party? Maybe it's both.
I think it's the question of whether we use Moody's as the third party. They are under contract with us. I don't think it's really a discussion about using somebody else.
Okay, got it. Okay.
I agree with the chairman.
I would say I agree as well. You know, we use, at Win at least, we use Moody's extensively. They rate all of our debt. They have, you know, an immense number of analysts that cover, you know, practically every sector of the economy, every, you know, major issuer within each sector of the economy. They get a lot of information through conversations with those companies. They have a lot of economists and analysts that can, I think, provide very good insight for us and as a committee and forum, and for the state in assessing, you know, the economics and the forecast that we're all evaluating here. So I concur and agree that we would benefit from that information.
So I just want to point out, Mr. Zahn, for your information, so it actually is a different division of Moody's. It's not the rating agency division.
Understood.
Moody's, yeah,
Understood.
but
my only
but
point
they
is that
also,
they
yeah.
have deep resources.
Yes, yes, and yes, and they, I have found them very, very beneficial in the past, the information that they present. So with that, then should we entertain a motion to, do we need a motion, Russell, to approve the?
Yes, Madam Chair, and
Okay.
just so that I can assist the chair and the members of the forum, that just clarification, what this motion is about is, as was stated here, is having Moody's come make presentations on what's been going on, as well as their outlook for national and regional state economies at the fall meeting and then at the May meeting. And I guess I forgot to point out that, so I should hear that for the forum going through to do the December forecast, they have an October and November meeting preceding the actual December meeting where the proof of forecast required by law. During the session, they only have the one meeting on or before the May deadline. And we'll talk about that more on the next agenda item. But so this agenda item would be for Moody's is that we would, the state will then work with them to extend the contract that we've had to come in and make presentations for the fall meeting and then for the meeting during session, as well as continue to prepare and present forecasts on the sales and gaming percentage fee tax. So Madam Chair, that would be the motion that I believe the members of the forum are entertaining here. And so, yes, we would need a first and a second, and then I'll call the roll call for this.
So I have a question. How long is this contract that we're looking to grant to Moody's?
How long is the contract period for?
You said we're looking to extend the contract that we currently have, and I think Chair Rosenthal, you said that the contract is already in place. I'm just trying
Well,
to
sorry, I misspoke, Mr. From that. It's been an ongoing thing, and the forum's always sort of approved this. So we had a contract with Moody's for the last forecast cycle. So we don't have Moody's under contract to come in and present at these inter meetings. So they come in and present for the fall of the even numbered years, and then during the May meeting in the odd numbered years for the actual forecast duties of the forum. So that's the contract covers that period that we had in place. And then we would be, in a sense, renewing or extending the contract, which is really what we're doing versus canceling a contract and then having to negotiate a new contract. We're sort of extending the contract. So it would be through the next forecast cycle, which would be the December 2022 through May 21 forecast meetings.
May 23.
Excuse me, May 23, yeah.
Got it. Thanks for the clarification. I make the motion to continue to use Moody's Analytics as our third-party private forecast service.
This is Vincent Zahn, I second.
Thank you both.
That works for me. And just before I can get the clarification, I think we might have had a motion there, I'm not sure, but we have Mr. Crow making the first and Mr. Zahn making the second for the motion to continue the Moody's contract services for making the presentations to the Economic Forum, as well as preparing and presenting forecast on the sales tax and gaming percentage fee tax. And with that as the motion, Madam Chair, I'll call the roll. We have Mr. Chrome.
Aye.
Mr. Levitt.
Aye.
Mr. Zahn.
Aye.
Vice Chair Lewis. Okay, and let the record show. And I will just put on the record here, Madam Chair, that I did get a text, which I didn't see till just shortly ago, that Vice Chair Lewis did let me know that she had to step out for a little bit, but since we still had a quorum, we're okay to continue to proceed. So I will let the record show that Vice Chair Lewis is absent excused for this vote. And then Chair Rosenthal.
Aye.
Thank you. Madam Chair, let the record show that the motion for item for agenda item 13 to continue the Moody's services was approved with the 4 members voting affirmatively and with Vice Chair Lewis being absent.
Very
So-
good.
Include this agenda item, I think.
Thank you. So the last agenda item before we go to public comment is scheduling of the future economic forum meetings. So the fall meetings, I presume, maybe not May, but I'll turn this back over to you, Mr. Ginden.
Thank you. And for the returning members, possibly will remember this. As has been stated several times, we have a meeting in October. It's generally somewhere around mid-October. And what we're waiting for is the actual numbers for FY 2022 to be finalized. And even though our fiscal year ends June 30th, when you look at a calendar, we don't officially close the fiscal year from an accounting point of view till the 3rd Friday in September. So then we're waiting to get all the final numbers and then get it tabulated, get all these charts and tables and that kind of stuff updated. So then we generally would have a forum meeting somewhere in that mid-October period. And that meeting is more informational. There are not forecasts being presented. So we would most likely, we have traditionally always had Mr. Schmidt, when we have the state demographer, again, we could have people come in and present on the federal stimulus and what's going on with that, as well as we can work with the chair and other members on anything that they think might be a relevant presentation. And so then we move in and have a meeting in November, generally the week of the general election, but after that Tuesday. So I would ask you that as members to try and keep that mid-November or mid-October period somewhat free. And after this meeting, it's hard to look that far in the future, but can start thinking about it and working with Chair Rosenthal in terms of potential dates if we'd like to block out. And then we can have staff from the forum reach out to the members and poll them. But I would ask you to probably try and keep, I believe the election is November 8th. So potentially try and keep that 9th, 10th, and 11th, which would be that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday open. I think that might be some of the viable days. And again, we generally start the meetings like this early in the morning. And then we, after the November meeting, we proceed in to have the meeting. And again, the law says the forum must prepare the forecast on or before December 3rd. But we drew a lucky straw here because December 3rd is a Saturday. So under the law, the forum can actually have up to 2 business days when the 3rd falls on a Friday, a Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday. So that would mean the forum can actually meet on that Monday, December 5th, or Tuesday, December 6th. And as staff to the forum, I'm going to sort of ask the chair to give serious consideration to the meeting being on the 5th or 6th. And the rest of you members trying to be able to see if you can get your schedules to meet one of those 2 days. The reason why is it's December 2nd is a very, very tight deadline for the forecasters and staff preparing information. Why? Because at the end of November, we have Thanksgiving in there, and the Gaming Control Board and Department of Taxation, we're all waiting for that one more actual numbers, right? So we can make our forecast better. So we don't frequently get those numbers till right before or sometimes right after Thanksgiving. So you go look at your calendar and where that Thanksgiving holiday is, and December 2nd is that Friday, which would be before the December 3rd. And it's just logistically very tight and difficult for staff and the forecasters. Thus, if that's where we end up, we'll see how we can figure it out. But I think here today for this agenda item is to really be looking at your schedules for that December 5th or 6th and seeing if they can keep them open and available. And then that November sort of 9th, 10th, and 11th, the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday after the general election. And then that mid-December, Madam Chair, those are I think the timelines that we're looking at for the meetings, where the October being more informational with no forecast presented. At the November meeting, there will be preliminary forecast presented. Generally at that meeting, the Economic Forum, they're not required to, nor do they actually approve any preliminary forecasts. It's just so they can start to get a view of where the forecasters think their thinking is, so that then they have an information set to take into consideration before they come in for hopefully that December 5th or 6th meeting, where they must actually approve a consensus forecast. And again, that's the forecast that will be used by the governor to prepare the executive budget that will be presented to the legislature. And so with that, that was the information that I wanted to provide. There is not any action that's required by the body for this agenda item, Madam Chair. I can't talk about it unless it's on the agenda. And so I've done my talking. And this, if there's questions, I can attempt to answer them. And then we can just, staff will work with Chair Rosenthal to start trying to think about polling for an October, November, and December timelines. But I've given you the ones that I believe are the viable weeks.
Hi, this is Vincent Zahn. The intent would be to have these meetings held in person, all else constant.
Yes, Madam Chair. Again, we will work with the chair, but the hope would be by this fall, we can schedule the physical meetings. And so what that would generally be is we would probably schedule a location at the Grant Sawyer office building in the legislative portion of that building, which is on the 4th floor, as well as in a room in the legislative building here in Carson City. But I think, as I've had a brief conversation with Chair Rosenthal, we don't know where we'll be. But we would possibly still maintain the ability for members to participate or the public or presenters virtually, because it would be better to have a structure where if something happens to your schedule that you can't physically make it to the north or south location, you could still participate and attend virtually. But yes, it would be, I think, working with the chair and is to start working towards having physical locations. Now, I will point out that we, as I said, we can have locations at the Grant Sawyer office building in Las Vegas, in the legislative building here in Carson City. I realize we have 4 Southern members and 1 Northern member in terms of the appointments to the body. Generally, what we've had is, because it's easier to potentially bring, if all of you want to be in the same physical location, which is a good thing, to bring the 4 Southern members up to Carson City versus trying to bring all the executive branch staff and the forecasters and that down to Grant Sawyer. But again, we could still do it virtually. So yes, Mr. Crum, that's what we would be working towards, is to have the physical locations. As to where members might actually be physically and or presenters and staff, that might have to be more of as we get closer and make a game time decision as to the actual functioning logistics. And so hopefully that gave you the information to address your question.
Hey, Russell, for the record, that was Vincent Zahn's question, but thank you. I need that information too. I know we got to do better about announcing ourselves. We'll get better.
So in that
Thank you.
vein, this is Linda Rosenthal, for the record. I was just going to add, I think for me personally, it's much more impactful and much more efficient if we're together for the forecast meeting at a minimum. I would love to have us together for November and December. October, I think, is a bit more flexible, as we're just getting updates on what's going on in the economy. But once we get to the nitty gritty forecasting, it really is beneficial to have us together as much as that's possible. I agree, it's great to keep it flexible because we all have very, very busy schedules. But to the extent we can try to set a date early enough that we can all be physically together, I think, especially with new members and everything else. And it's been 2 years since we've been together. I think that would be a good thing.
This is Michael Crum, for the record. I'm supportive of being there in person. As long as we know well in advance the schedule, I'm sure I can try to make it work. So let's try to get those scheduled.
I appreciate that information, Madam Chair and Mr. Crum. And so we will try to work on it. It's hard to just lock it down too much in advance. I realize that is the great benefit, I believe, of the economic reform process, that we have these 5 private sector individuals that are willing to dedicate their time to the forum, but then having to realize that, yes, you're private sector people that have your own personal and professional lives to attend to. So we will try and work through that. And I will point out, just for everyone, that as we start to get some of this stuff scheduled out, we will have staff that will be reaching out and can work with you to schedule your flights and that kind of stuff. If you are going to be, say, flying up here from Las Vegas to Carson City and as well, or flying the other way. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that as we start to get some of this stuff worked out, that we will also be working with you in terms of logistics of getting your travel arrangements lined up to attend the meeting where you're going to attend the meeting. And then we'll also work as necessary to get staff where they need to be to make sure the meeting functionally works for the chair as well as the rest of the members. And that's all I had to say on this item, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gindin. So let's move on to agenda item 15, which is public comment. If we could have the assistance from the Broadcasting Production Services to open the line for any member of the public that would like to make a comment.
Thank you, Chair Rosenthal. Your public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you very much. Before we adjourn, I would just like to take a moment. We have a bit of a celebration to recognize, celebration for some, sadness for some of the rest of us. But we have a couple retirements coming up in the next few months. So the most imminent one is Joe Reel, who's a member of our staff and with the Legislative Council Bureau, who I believe will be retiring in July. So I think, Joe, you're on. Just want to wish you all the best and thank you so much for all of your assistance to the forum and all of the years that you've been helping us keep things straight and pull together some good forecast numbers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate it. And this has been one of the highlights of my career working at the legislature.
Nice. Very nice. All the best to you.
Thank you.
I'm a little envious or a lot. And then secondly, Mr. Gindin also has a retirement planned later this year, probably sometime in December. So he at least will be with us as we go through the crunch of the fall forecast, but will not be with us in May. So again, I want to wish you all the best, Russell. It's been super wonderful working with you. Couldn't have done any of it without you. And then along those veins, want to wish you all the best. And then maybe if you could walk us through, I know there's already been some appointments made to fill the shoes of both you and Joe. If you could kind of tell us what's happening with the staffing going forward.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the comments. And I would agree with my colleague, Mr. Reel, that as economists, the economic forum is sort of one of the really interesting parts of our job as staff to the legislature, because we are nonpartisan staff to the 63 members of the Nevada Legislature, as members of staff to the Fiscal Analysis Division. So we're an economist there, but this allows us, the economist, and the economic forum is, it's a very important element of the state's budget process. In fact, as the 3 returning members know, that there's entities out there that review the economic forum forecast or forecasting processes of states, and the state of Nevada's economic forecast gets very high reviews. Why? Because it's done publicly. It's done with non-governmental people sitting on the body, approving the forecast that must be then used by the governor and then are used by the legislature in developing the budget, as well as you have outside entities like Moody's also participating as along with the government forecasters, the private sector forecasters. So those are some of the elements that entities that review states' forecast processes give Nevada a ranking. And I will add that it was actually the 1993 bill that brought me to the state of Nevada in 1994, working for the budget office for 2 years before I went to the Gaming Control Board for 3 years before I ended up here. But I have been with the Economic Forum since their very first forecast cycle, which was the 1994-1995 forecast cycle. So it's been an extreme pleasure and privilege to be with the forum that long and see it. I wouldn't mind having a redo on the Great Recession and pandemic as a future, but that probably ain't gonna happen. So with that, I wanna thank the members of the forum. We'll see you through the fall cycle. And then, yeah, I will probably be retiring before the end of the calendar year. So then the transition is the three returning members now, and we have Michael Nakamoto, who's Joe Rios and myself's colleague here in the Fiscal Analysis Division, will be taking over my role as the Chief Principal Deputy Fiscal Analyst in the Fiscal Analysis Division. But you've seen him. He has already been part of preparing forecasts, and you will see him this fall making his presentations. And then as the transition for the team is we've hired Susanna Powers, which the three of you are returning now. She has been the economist in the budget division. And so she's been preparing and presenting her forecast to the Technical Advisory Committee and the Economic Forum. And so we were lucky enough to have her come over here and join the fiscal division. So good news, bad news for the budget division, good news for fiscal, that it should be somewhat more seamless for the forecasting process for the fiscal division, have Susanna come on board. And we're also lucky enough then to the other replacement is Christian Thayer, who is, he has been with the Fiscal Analysis Division for a few years, and he's been on what's called the program or budget side of the Fiscal Analysis Division. And he has decided that he wants to join. And I'll have to say it, we're referred to as the tax team in the legislative process as well as elsewhere, because we staff the revenue or taxation committees during session and the interim. And obviously we forecast taxes / revenues. So it became somehow people started referring to Michael, Joe, and Russell walking around as the tax team, and it stuck. So I find myself saying that. So that's what I'm saying is Suzanne and Christian are now members of the tax team, as Joe will transition out here in a few weeks. And then I'll transition out later, and Michael will come in and become the tax team leader, with the members of his team continuing to be Suzanne and Christian. And so, Madam Chair, I appreciate you allowing staff the opportunity to provide that information to the members of this body. Clearly, you'll see a new face from the budget division, and it's also our information set that Haley Owens from the Department of Taxation is the economist there, has moved on to another job. So we will be seeing a new economist from the Department of Taxation in terms of the forecaster that will present taxation's forecast. So it truly will be, we'll add that to the interesting level of the fall forecast cycle for this economic forum. And I would also like, Madam Chair, to personally welcome all of you back as staff. I think to have the three of you return, but also then seeing the credentials and the background of Mr. Zahn and Mr. Crum, I think it will be good to have them as members of the forum as we progress through this interesting forecast cycle. And with that, again, thank you for the time.
Absolutely. So congratulations on the retirements and congratulations on the new responsibilities for those that are changing jobs and roles. So before we adjourn, I'll just give everybody one last chance if anybody has any comment they want to make. Otherwise, we'll wrap this up.
No comments from me.
No comments from Vincent Zahn.
Oh, no comments from Michael Crum. That's right.
But I do echo Chair Rosenthal's sentiments regarding outbound and inbound individuals on the team at Forum. So best of luck to all, and thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, with that, we will adjourn the meeting, the June 10th, June 9th, 2022 meeting of the Economic Forum. Look forward to seeing you all in the fall.
Madam Chair, and I will be reaching out to you possibly in the next week or so.
Great, sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night or day.
Thank you.